Hello everyone, I am MANO Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. My name is Rebecca Lawson. I'm 32 years old. This happened in March 2025. Though sometimes I still question if it happened at all. 4 of us had planned this hiking trip through the Fakahatchee Strand Preserve State Park in the Everglades for months. I'd been friends with Mia Carpenter and Tyler Jennings since college, and Tyler had recently started dating Danielle "Danny" Lopez. Our plan was simple: a 5-day backpacking trip through one of Florida's most remote swampland preserves, known for its ghost orchids and pristine wilderness. I had been the one to suggest it, a way to disconnect from our hectic lives in Orlando. I should have known better. The Everglades has a way of keeping what enters. The first day was everything we'd hoped. We parked at the Jones Grade trailhead at the northern edge of the preserve and started our hike southward. The weather was perfect, mid-70s with a light breeze keeping the mosquitoes at bay. Mia documented everything on her camera. Tyler and Danny walked hand in hand, and I led the way with my weathered topographical map. As a high school biology teacher, I'd been fascinated by the Fakahatchee's ecosystem since my undergrad days, and I'd spent weeks planning our route through its cypress domes and swamp forests. "You sure we're not going to run into any pythons out here?" Tyler joked, swatting at a hanging vine. "I've heard they're taking over." "Probably," I said with a grin, "but they're the least of our worries." I meant it as a joke, but looking back, it was the first of many warnings I should have heeded. "Well, I'm more worried about stepping on a water moccasin," Danny said. She was newer to our group, but fit right in. Quick-witted, tough, and always prepared. As an ER nurse, she had insisted on bringing a medical kit that could have serviced a small hospital. "According to my research, we should reach a good camping spot just before sunset," I said, pointing to a spot on the map where a small rise offered drier ground. "It's about 7 more miles." We continued our trek, the terrain gradually shifting from open prairie to the dense swamp forest the Fakahatchee is known for. Massive cypress trees towered overhead, their knees jutting from the dark water like bony fingers. Spanish moss hung in thick curtains, filtering the sunlight into a greenish haze. By late afternoon, we reached the clearing I'd marked for our first campsite. It was exactly as the ranger had described, a small hammock with enough dry space for our 2 tents. Tyler and Danny set up their tent while Mia and I assembled ours. Soon, we had a small campfire going, and we sat around it cooking instant ramen with dehydrated vegetables. "This place is gorgeous," Mia said, scrolling through the photos on her camera. "I can't believe we have it all to ourselves." "That's the beauty of it," I replied. "Fakahatchee isn't as popular as the main Everglades trails. Too remote for most tourists." "Well, I'm glad we're here," Danny said, leaning against Tyler. "It's nice to finally disconnect." "Speaking of which," Tyler said, checking his phone, "I've got no service. Guess we're truly off the grid now." We all checked our phones to confirm. No signal. "Good," I said. "That was the whole point, right?" As darkness fell, the swamp transformed. What had been beautiful became eerie. The sounds intensified: frogs croaking, insects buzzing, and occasionally splashes in the nearby water that seemed too large to be fish. Our conversation dwindled as we became more aware of the wilderness surrounding us. "Did you guys know this area has some pretty wild history?" I said, trying to break the growing silence. "The Seminole used to hide out in these swamps during the Indian Wars. Some say their spirits still wander around." "Great bedtime story, Becca," Mia groaned. "That's exactly what I want to think about while trying to sleep in the middle of nowhere." "Just saying," I laughed. "This place has seen some dark times." That night, I had trouble sleeping. The noises of the swamp were constant, a living, breathing symphony that never quite faded into white noise. Around 2 a.m., I woke to a sound I couldn't identify, something between a woman's cry and a bird call, coming from deep in the swamp. I lay still in my sleeping bag, straining to hear it again, but it didn't return. The next morning, I felt groggy and on edge. Mia seemed the same. "Did you hear that weird sound last night?" I asked her as we boiled water for coffee. "What sound?" she asked. "Like a woman crying or something, around 2 a.m. "No, but I had the strangest dream," Mia said, lowering her voice. "I dreamed there was an old woman standing at the edge of our campsite, just watching us. She was soaking wet, like she'd been in the swamp. Her eyes were wrong somehow." "Looks like someone shouldn't have listened to Becca's ghost stories," Tyler teased as he emerged from his tent, overhearing our conversation. "It just felt so real," Mia insisted, then shrugged. "Anyway, what's the plan for today?" After breakfast, we packed up and continued our journey deeper into the preserve. The trail grew less defined, sometimes disappearing entirely beneath ankle-deep water. We relied more heavily on my map and compass. The day grew hotter and more humid, the air thick enough to chew. Mosquitoes formed clouds around us despite our repellent. By midday, we reached a particularly beautiful stretch, a narrow path alongside a tea-colored stream, canopied by ancient cypress trees dripping with air plants and orchids. We stopped for lunch, and Mia wandered a short distance away to photograph a cluster of bromeliads. That's when we heard her scream. We rushed toward the sound to find her staring at something half submerged in the black water. As we got closer, I realized it was a doll, an old-fashioned porcelain doll with a cracked face and hollow eye sockets. Its dress was rotted and stained dark with what looked like blood. "What the hell is that doing out here?" Danny asked, her voice tight. "Probably washed downstream from somewhere," I suggested, though I didn't believe it. We were miles from any settlement. "Let's keep moving," Tyler said, putting his arm around Mia, who couldn't stop staring at the doll. I wished I'd taken a photo of it. Later, no one would believe me when I described its eyes, how they seemed to follow us as we walked away. That night, we camped near a small pond that the map identified as Deep Hole, a natural sinkhole known for its alligator population. We set up camp well away from the water's edge, but I still felt uneasy. The feeling that we were being watched had been growing stronger all day. As we sat around our campfire eating freeze-dried beef stew, Mia suddenly froze, her spoon halfway to her mouth. "Do you guys see that?" she whispered, nodding toward the darkness beyond our campsite. We all turned to look. At first, I saw nothing. Then, just at the edge of the firelight, I caught a glimpse of movement, a pale figure ducking behind a cypress trunk. "Hello?" Tyler called out, standing up. "Is someone there?" No response, just the normal sounds of the swamp. "I'm sure it was nothing," Danny said, but she moved closer to Tyler. "Probably just a deer," I added, though I knew there were few deer in this part of the preserve. We turned in early that night, exhausted from the day's hike. In our tent, Mia kept tossing and turning. "I can't shake this feeling," she whispered, "like we're not alone out here." "It's just the wilderness playing tricks on us," I assured her, though my own skin was prickling with unease. Around midnight, I woke to the sound of splashing water. Careful not to wake Mia, I unzipped the tent and peered outside. The moon was nearly full, casting a silvery glow over the landscape. The pond's surface was rippling, though there was no wind. As I watched, something large moved beneath the water, creating swirls of phosphorescence. Then I saw her, an elderly woman standing knee-deep in the pond, her long white hair hanging in wet strands around her face. She was wearing what looked like a nightgown, soaked and clinging to her skeletal frame. Even from a distance, I could see her eyes, milky white without pupils. She was staring directly at our campsite. I ducked back inside the tent, my heart hammering. I told myself I was seeing things, that it was just an odd-shaped cypress stump or a trick of the moonlight. But deep down, I knew what I'd seen. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, I debated whether to tell the others. They all looked tired, and I noticed Danny was particularly quiet. "Everything okay?" I asked her as we filtered water for the day's journey. "Just didn't sleep well," she replied, avoiding my eyes. Tyler kept getting up during the night, said he heard someone calling his name. A chill ran through me. Did he see anything? No, she said. At least that's what he told me. As we continued our trek that day, the atmosphere in our group had changed. We walked mostly in silence, jumping at unexpected sounds. The swamp seemed darker, the water murkier. Even the wildlife seemed scarcer. Fewer bird calls, fewer sightings of the small creatures that had been abundant on our first day. Around midday, we reached a junction where the trail split. According to my map, the left fork would take us through what locals called Witches' Gardens, an area known for rare ghost orchids, while the right fork offered a more direct route to our planned campsite. Let's go left, Mia suggested, surprising me. She'd been the most on edge all day. I'd love to see those orchids. We took the left path, which soon led us into a section of the swamp unlike any I'd seen before. The cypress trees here were ancient giants, their massive trunks twisted into grotesque shapes. The water was still and black, reflecting the trees like a dark mirror. Spanish moss hung so thick it blotted out much of the sunlight, creating a perpetual twilight. And then we found the first offering tree. It was a massive cypress, its trunk split down the middle as if struck by lightning. Hanging from its branches were dozens of items, dolls similar to the one we'd found earlier, small animal bones tied with red thread, glass bottles filled with murky substances, and crude stick figures bound with hair. "What the hell?" Tyler whispered, his face pale. "Some kind of art installation," Danny suggested, but her voice wavered. "No," I said, my mouth dry. "These are offerings. Witch bottles, protection talismans." I'd read about such things in my research on Everglades folklore but had dismissed them as local legends. "Protection from what?" Mia asked. "From her," came a voice behind us. We spun around to see a man standing on the trail. He was tall and gaunt, with sun-weathered skin and a wild gray beard. He wore tattered clothes and carried a walking stick carved with strange symbols. A large brown dog stood at his side, watching us with intelligent eyes. "You shouldn't be here," the man said, his voice gravelly from disuse. "Not now. Not when she's hungry." "Who are you?" Tyler demanded, stepping in front of Danny. "Name's Samuel Cady," the man replied. "Been living out here for nigh on 15 years, and you folks have wandered into Agatha's territory." "Agatha?" I asked. "The Lady of Dead Water," he said, gesturing to the black pond nearby. "Some call her a witch, others a hag. The Seminole have another name for her, one I won't speak aloud. She's been here longer than any of us." "Look, we're just hiking through," I said, trying to sound reasonable despite the fear gripping my chest. "We'll be gone tomorrow." Samuel shook his head. "She's already seen you. Already chosen." His eyes drifted to Tyler, who shifted uncomfortably. "You heard her call last night, didn't you, son?" Tyler's face drained of color. "How did you—" "Come with me," Samuel interrupted. "My cabin's not far. It's not safe to talk here." She listens. Against my better judgment, we followed Samuel. His dog, which he called Preacher, led the way, occasionally stopping to growl at shadows I couldn't see. After about 20 minutes of walking on a nearly invisible trail, we reached a small cabin built on stilts above the swamp. It was crude but sturdy, with symbols carved into every doorpost and window frame. Inside was sparse but clean. A cot, a table with 2 chairs, some shelves with books and supplies, and a small wood stove. "It's not much," Samuel said, "but it's protected." "Protected from what, exactly?" Danny asked, her medical rationality clearly at odds with the situation. Samuel gestured for us to sit. "You ever heard of Agatha Blackwood?" When we shook our heads, he continued. "Back in the 1880s, she was a healer who lived out here. Some say she practiced black magic, made deals with things that live in the deep water. Story goes, she was drowned by the locals who blamed her for a sickness that killed their children." "And you believe she's still here?" I asked, trying to keep the skepticism from my voice. "I know she is," Samuel said, his eyes intense. "I've seen her take people. That's why I put up those offerings, to keep her appeased, to protect myself and Preacher." "This is insane," Tyler muttered. "Is it?" Samuel challenged. "You heard her calling. Your friend saw her in her dreams." He nodded toward Mia, who gasped. "How did you know that?" she whispered. "Because that's how she works," Samuel explained. "First, she enters your dreams. Then she calls to you, makes you see things. And finally," he drew a finger across his throat. "Why are you telling us this?" I asked. "Because you might still have a chance," he replied. "There's a way to ward her off, but you have to believe first." We stayed at Samuel's cabin that night. None of us said it aloud, but I think we were all too frightened to continue our journey. Samuel shared his simple meal of fish stew and showed us protective symbols we could draw on our skin with a paste he made from certain plants. Despite my scientific mind, I let him mark my forehead with the mixture. It smelled of earth and something metallic. As night fell, Samuel grew increasingly agitated. He paced the small cabin, checking the symbols on the doors and windows, muttering to himself. Preacher whined, his ears flat against his head. "She's angry tonight," Samuel said. "She knows I'm helping you." We huddled together on the floor, our sleeping bags forming a circle. Samuel sat in a chair by the door, his shotgun across his knees, Preacher at his feet. I must have fallen asleep despite my fear, because I woke suddenly to the sound of something scratching at the walls of the cabin. It was pitch black, the fire in the wood stove having died down to embers. I could hear the others breathing, all except Tyler. "Tyler," I whispered. No response. I fumbled for my headlamp and switched it on. Tyler's sleeping bag was empty. I shook Danny awake. "Tyler's gone," I hissed. She bolted upright, her eyes wild. "What? Where is he?" Our commotion woke Samuel and Mia. Samuel cursed when he saw the empty sleeping bag. He rushed to the door, which was still bolted from the inside. "The window," he growled, pointing to a small window that was now open, its protective symbols smudged. We searched the cabin frantically, but Tyler was nowhere to be found. Samuel grabbed his shotgun and whistled for Preacher. "Stay here," he ordered us. "Bar the door behind me. Don't open it for anyone but me." "I'm coming with you," Danny insisted, already pulling on her boots. "Me too," I said. Mia nodded her agreement. Samuel looked like he wanted to argue, but then nodded grimly. "Stay close. And whatever you do, don't listen if you hear her call your name." We followed Samuel into the swamp, the beam of our headlamps cutting through the thick darkness. The night was alive with sounds, frogs, insects, and other things I couldn't identify. Preacher led the way, his nose to the ground, occasionally stopping to sniff the air. We hadn't gone far when we heard it, Tyler's voice calling for help. "Danny! Becca! Help me! I'm hurt!" Danny started forward, but Samuel grabbed her arm. "That's not him," he warned. "That's her, using his voice." "But what if it is him?" Danny argued, tears in her eyes. Before Samuel could answer, we heard a splash nearby, then the sound of something large moving through the water. Preacher growled, the hair on his back standing on end. "She's close," Samuel whispered. "Too close." That's when we saw her, the old woman I'd glimpsed at the pond. She was standing about 30 feet away, her white hair gleaming in the moonlight, her nightgown soaked with swamp water. But now I could see her face clearly, the skin gray and bloated, the eyes milky white, the mouth stretched in an impossibly wide smile that revealed blackened teeth. "Run," Samuel said, raising his shotgun. "Run." We fled, crashing through the undergrowth, splashing through shallow water. Behind us, I heard Samuel fire his shotgun, followed by a scream that sounded neither human nor animal. Then another shot, and silence. We ran until our lungs burned, finally stopping in a small clearing to catch our breath. "What about Samuel?" Mia gasped. "And Tyler," Danny added, her voice breaking. "We need to get help," I said, trying to sound calmer than I felt. "We need to get back to the trail, back to civilization." "But which way is it?" Mia asked, looking around desperately. In our panic, we'd run blindly into the swamp. I pulled out my compass, but the needle was spinning wildly, refusing to settle on a direction. My map was useless without knowing our position. The realization hit me like a physical blow. We were lost in the Fakahachi, in Agatha's territory. "Let's just pick a direction and stick to it," I suggested. "Eventually, we'll hit a trail or a road." We chose what seemed like the path of the least resistance and began walking. The swamp had never felt more alien or hostile. Every shadow seemed to move, every sound a potential threat. We walked for what felt like hours, but the landscape remained eerily similar, as if we were going in circles. Dawn was breaking when Mia spotted something ahead, a clearing with what looked like a trail. Relief flooded through me. We hurried forward only to stop short at the edge of the clearing. It was Samuel's cabin. "That's impossible," Danny whispered. "We've been walking away from it all night." The cabin looked different in the gray morning light, older somehow, with moss growing thick on its roof and walls. The door hung open on broken hinges. Of Samuel and Preacher, there was no sign. "We should check inside," I said, though every instinct screamed against it. "There might be supplies we can use, a working phone, something." Reluctantly, we approached the cabin. The inside was nothing like the place we'd left hours before. It was abandoned, decayed, with fallen beams and rotted floorboards. It looked as if it had been empty for decades. "This can't be the same cabin," Mia said, her voice trembling. "But it is," came a voice from the doorway. We turned to see Tyler standing there. He looked terrible, his clothes soaked and torn, his face scratched and bruised, but he was alive. "Tyler!" Danny cried, rushing toward him. "Stop," I said, grabbing her arm. Something was wrong. Tyler's eyes looked different, empty. "What happened to you?" I asked, keeping my distance. "Where's Samuel?" "Samuel?" Tyler's face showed no recognition. "I don't know any Samuel. I got lost last night, fell into the water, but then she helped me." "Who helped you?" Danny asked, trying again to move toward him. I tightened my grip on her arm. Tyler's face changed then, his features twisting into an expression I'd never seen before, a mixture of cruelty and hunger that made my blood run cold. "Agatha," he said, but the voice that came out wasn't Tyler's. It was higher, feminine, with an accent I couldn't place. "She's been so lonely. She needs company, new vessels." "Tyler, this isn't you," Danny pleaded. "Fight it." Tyler, or whatever was wearing Tyler's body, laughed. The sound was all wrong, like breaking glass. "Tyler's gone, child. Gone to the deep water, just like you'll be." He lunged forward with inhuman speed. I shoved Danny out of the way and felt Tyler's hands close around my throat. His strength was incredible. As my vision began to darken, I caught a glimpse of his eyes, no longer empty but filled with swirling black water. Suddenly, his grip loosened. Tyler screamed, a sound of pure agony, and fell to the ground. Behind him stood Mia, holding what looked like one of Samuel's protective talismans. She must have found it in the ruins of the cabin. "Run!" she shouted. We fled the cabin, Tyler's inhuman screams following us. We ran without direction, without thought, our only goal to put distance between us and what Tyler had become. The swamp seemed to fight us at every turn, vines snagging our ankles, mud sucking at our boots, branches whipping our faces. But we kept running until we couldn't anymore, collapsing on a small rise, gasping for breath. "What do we do now?" Danny sobbed. "What's happened to Tyler?" I had no answer. My scientific mind was in full retreat, unable to process what we'd seen and experienced. All I knew was that we needed to get out of this swamp, away from Agatha's influence. "Let's rest a minute," I suggested, then try to find our way back to the main trail. As we sat, catching our breath, I noticed something odd. a series of wooden posts sticking out of the water nearby. They formed a line leading to what looked like a small island about 50 yards away. On the island stood a dilapidated structure, a house or cabin, half hidden by vegetation. "Look," I said, pointing. "Maybe there's someone there who can help us." "Or maybe it's another trap," Mia warned. "We don't have many options," I replied. "We're lost, exhausted, and whatever's happened to Tyler, we can't handle it alone." With great caution, we followed the posts, which turned out to be an old boardwalk, mostly submerged but still passable. The island was larger than it had appeared from a distance, maybe an acre of relatively dry ground. The structure was indeed a house, an old Florida cracker-style home with a wide porch and tin roof, weathered by decades of sun and rain. "Hello," I called out as we approached. "Is anyone here? We need help." No answer came from the house, but as we drew closer, I noticed details that made my skin crawl. The same protective symbols Samuel had used, carved into the porch posts and window frames. And hanging from the eaves, dozens of the same crude dolls we'd seen on the offering tree. "I don't like this," Danny whispered. Before I could respond, the front door creaked open. A woman stood in the doorway, elderly but straight-backed, her silver hair pulled into a tight bun, her face deeply lined but her eyes sharp and clear. She wore a simple dress that looked decades out of fashion. "I've been expecting you," she said, her voice surprisingly strong. "Come inside quickly. She can't cross running water easily, but that won't stop her for long." Too exhausted and frightened to question this strange welcome, we followed her into the house. The interior was neat and well kept, filled with old furniture and shelves of books, dried herbs hanging from the ceiling beams. A fire burned in the stone hearth despite the warm day. "Sit," the woman commanded, gesturing to chairs arranged near the fire. "You look half dead." We sank gratefully into the chairs. The woman busied herself preparing tea, adding various dried herbs to the pot before pouring it into mismatched cups. "Drink," she said, handing us each a cup. "It will help clear your minds." The tea tasted bitter, but not unpleasant. Warmth spread through my body as I drank, and with it came a strange clarity. "Who are you?" I asked the woman. "My name is Eleanor Blackwood," she replied, taking a seat across from us, "and I believe you've met my sister." "Your sister?" Mia echoed, her eyes wide. "Agatha," Eleanor confirmed. "Though what you encountered is no longer the sister I knew. That creature is something else now, something twisted by hatred and dark power." "How is this possible?" Danny asked. "Samuel told us Agatha Blackwood lived in the 1880s. Eleanor nodded. "She did. We both did. I am preserved, you might say, bound to this place as she is, but in a different way. You expect us to believe you're over 140 years old?" I couldn't help the skepticism in my voice. "Believe what you wish," Eleanor said calmly, "but your friend is in Agatha's grasp and you three aren't far behind. You need my help, whether you understand what's happening or not." She was right about that, at least. "Can you help us find our way out of here?" I asked. "And is there any way to save Tyler?" Eleanor's expression grew somber. "The swamp is Agatha's domain. She can twist paths, confuse directions. As for your friend, it depends on how deeply she's taken hold of him. Tell me, when did he start hearing her call?" "Last night," Danny said. "At least that's when I noticed him getting up." Eleanor frowned. "And he disappeared later that same night?" When we nodded, she sighed. "That's unusually fast. She must be very hungry indeed." "What does that mean for Tyler?" Danny demanded. "It means we have little time," Eleanor replied. "The longer he remains in her grasp, the less of him there will be to save." She rose and went to a cabinet withdrawing a wooden box inlaid with silver. From it, she took what looked like small bundles of herbs tied with red thread. "These will help protect you," she said, handing one to each of us. "Keep them close." "What about Tyler?" Danny persisted. To free him, we must confront Agatha, Eleanor said. And to do that, we need to go to the place where she died, the place called Dead Water. The pond near Samuel's cabin? I guessed. Eleanor nodded. It's a natural sinkhole, very deep. The locals drowned her there, weighed down with stones, but they didn't understand what she'd become. Death wasn't the end for Agatha. It was a transformation. How do you know all this? Mia asked. Eleanor's eyes grew distant. Because I was there. I couldn't stop them from killing her, but I've spent the decades since trying to contain what she became to prevent her from taking more victims. Like Samuel? I asked softly. Samuel Cady was a good man, Eleanor said. He came to the swamp broken and alone, but he learned to respect its power. He helped me for many years. Was? Danny caught the past tense. I felt his passing last night, Eleanor confirmed. He died trying to protect you. The reality of our situation hit me anew. Samuel was dead, Tyler possessed, and we were trapped in a swamp with a supernatural predator hunting us. It was too much to process. Rest now, Eleanor said, seeing our exhaustion. We'll leave at dusk. Agatha is strongest at night, but it's also when the veil between worlds is thinnest. That's when we'll have the best chance to reach your friend. Despite my fear and confusion, I felt myself growing drowsy. The tea, I realized too late, Eleanor had drugged us. I tried to fight it, but darkness claimed me. When I awoke, the light had changed. Golden, late-afternoon sunlight filtered through the windows. Mia and Danny were still asleep in their chairs. Eleanor sat at a table nearby, grinding something in a mortar. "Why did you drug us?" I demanded, my voice hoarse. "You needed sleep," she replied without looking up, "and I needed to prepare." I noticed new markings on my arms, symbols drawn in some kind of paste, similar to what Samuel had used, but more elaborate. "What are these?" "Protection," Eleanor said, stronger than what Samuel could provide. As Mia and Danny began to stir, Eleanor laid out her plan. We would return to Deadwater Pond at sunset. She had a ritual that might separate Tyler from Agatha's influence, but it would only work if enough of him remained. "And if it doesn't work?" Danny asked, her eyes red from crying. Eleanor's face hardened. "Then we do what must be done, for his sake as much as yours." The journey back through the swamp was eerily uneventful. With Eleanor leading the way, the path seemed to clear before us. No vines snagged our feet, no branches whipped our faces. It was as if the swamp itself gave way to her. We reached dead water as the sun was setting. The pond looked different now. Larger somehow, its black water perfectly still despite the evening breeze. Samuel's cabin was nowhere to be seen. "She's changing the landscape," Eleanor explained, seeing my confusion, "bending reality to her will." Eleanor set to work immediately, placing candles at specific points around the edge of the pond and drawing symbols in the mud with a silver knife. She handed each of us a small cloth bag. "Whatever happens, don't lose these," she instructed, "and don't enter the water, no matter what you see or hear." As darkness fell, Eleanor began to chant in a language I didn't recognize. The candles flared higher, their flames turning an unnatural blue. The surface of the pond began to ripple, though there was no wind. "She's coming," Eleanor whispered, and then we saw him, Tyler, walking slowly from the trees on the far side of the pond. But it wasn't really Tyler. His movements were wrong, too fluid, almost serpentine. His eyes reflected the candlelight like a cat's. "Tyler!" Danny called out, starting forward before I could grab her. "That's not Tyler," I hissed, pulling her back. "Remember what Eleanor said." Not Tyler smiled, and even from a distance I could see too many teeth in that smile. "Eleanor," he said in that wrong voice, "Sister dear, it's been too long." "Let the boy go." "Agatha," Eleanor commanded. "He's not yours to take." Not Tyler laughed, the sound sending chills down my spine. But he came so willingly. They always do when I call. His gaze shifted to us. And these three will join him soon. So young, so full of life. Delicious. Eleanor raised her arms, her voice growing louder as she continued her chant. The symbols she'd drawn began to glow with a pale light. Not Tyler's smile faltered. He took a step back from the pond's edge. "Your tricks won't work, sister," he snarled, but there was uncertainty in his voice. Eleanor reached into her pocket and withdrew what looked like a very old locket. She opened it, revealing a small daguerreotype photograph inside. "Remember who you were, Agatha," she called out, "before the darkness took you. Remember when we were children, before you turned to the black arts." Not Tyler's face contorted in rage. "That weak girl is gone," he shrieked. "I am eternal now." Eleanor threw the locket into the pond. The moment it touched the water, the pond's surface erupted. A column of water shot upward, taking the form of a woman. Agatha, as she must have looked in life, before her drowning, before whatever dark power had claimed her. "Not!" Tyler screamed, falling to his knees at the edge of the pond. His body convulsed, his back arching at an impossible angle. A black substance began to pour from his mouth, his nose, his eyes, flowing like oil toward the water. "Now!" Eleanor shouted at us. "Open your bags and throw them into the water." We did as instructed. From each bag came a cloud of white powder that mingled with the black substance flowing from Tyler. Where they met, the darkness hissed and steamed, recoiling from the powder. Tyler collapsed, unconscious but breathing. The black substance retreated to the pond where it merged with the water column. The watery figure of Agatha writhed and screamed, a sound like ice cracking and women wailing. Then it collapsed back into the pond with a thunderous splash that soaked us all. For a moment, everything was still. The candles had been extinguished. The symbols Eleanor had drawn were gone, washed away by the water. Only the sound of our ragged breathing broke the silence. Then Danny rushed to Tyler's side, cradling his head. "Tyler, can you hear me?" He groaned, his eyelids fluttering. When they opened, his eyes were normal again, confused and frightened, but human. "What happened?" he managed to whisper. "Don't try to talk," Danny said, tears streaming down her face. "You're safe now." Eleanor approached slowly, her face drawn and exhausted. She knelt beside Tyler and examined him, checking his pupils, feeling his pulse. "Is he—" I couldn't finish the question. "He's himself again," Eleanor confirmed, "but weak. The separation takes a toll on the body and the mind." "Can we move him?" Mia asked. "We need to get out of here." "Soon," Eleanor said, "but first we need to complete the ritual. Agatha is weakened, but not defeated. She will return stronger unless we bind her once more." Eleanor produced a small silver knife from her pocket. Before any of us could react, she made a small cut on her palm. "Blood of my blood," she murmured, letting a few drops fall into the pond. The water hissed where they landed. She then approached each of us. "I need a small offering from each of you," she explained, "to seal the binding." I hesitated, but something in Eleanor's eyes reassured me. I extended my hand and she made a small, precise cut. It stung, but not badly. Mia and Danny followed suit. Even Tyler, barely conscious, allowed a few drops of his blood to be taken. Eleanor returned to the edge of the pond. As our blood touched the water, a strange mist began to rise from its surface. Not white like normal fog, but with an opalescent sheen, as if containing trapped moonlight. Bound by blood, bound by water, bound by earth, bound by fire, Eleanor chanted. "Return to your rest, sister. Sleep once more." The mist thickened, swirling around us like a living thing. For a moment, I thought I saw faces in it, tortured, pleading faces. Then it collapsed in on itself and was gone, leaving the pond's surface smooth and still once more. "It's done," Eleanor said, her voice thin with exhaustion. "For now." "For now?" I asked, alarmed. "Agatha can never be truly destroyed," Eleanor explained, helping Tyler to his feet with Danny's assistance. "Only contained temporarily. She will grow strong again, eventually. But it won't be in your lifetimes." "And you?" Mia asked. "Will you stay here, keeping watch?" Eleanor smiled sadly. "As I have for over a century. It is my penance and my purpose." We spent that night at Eleanor's house recovering our strength. Tyler slept deeply, occasionally muttering in his sleep but never waking. Danny refused to leave his side. Mia and I took turns keeping watch, though Eleanor assured us we were safe on her island. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Eleanor provided us with a simple breakfast and, more importantly, precise directions to the nearest ranger station. "The swamp won't fight you now," she promised. "Agatha's influence is contained. You'll find your way easily." As we prepared to leave, Tyler now walking with Danny's support, I turned to Eleanor. "How will we explain all this? No one will believe us." "They don't need to," she replied. "Tell them you got lost. Tell them Tyler fell and hit his head. The world prefers simple explanations." "And Samuel?" I asked. "Shouldn't someone know what happened to him?" Eleanor's eyes darkened. "I will see to Samuel," she said. "He understood the risks of living in Agatha's territory. He made his choice long ago." As we were about to depart, Eleanor pressed something into my hand, a small amulet on a leather cord. It was made of silver and carved with symbols similar to those she'd used in the ritual. "Keep this," she said. "Protection, should you ever return to the deep places." "I don't plan to," I assured her. Eleanor smiled knowingly. "Few do, yet the wilderness calls to some of us, doesn't it? The mystery of it, the danger." I couldn't deny it. Despite everything, part of me already missed the wild beauty of the Fakahatchi. "Thank you," I said simply, slipping the amulet around my neck. Eleanor nodded. "Go now, and remember, stay on the path." The journey out of the swamp was remarkably straightforward, just as Eleanor had promised. Within a few hours, we reached a well-maintained trail, and by mid-afternoon, we arrived at a ranger station. We told them exactly what Eleanor had suggested, that we'd gotten lost and Tyler had fallen and hit his head. They called in a medical team for Tyler and arranged for our transportation back to civilization. At the hospital, Tyler was diagnosed with a concussion and dehydration. The doctors were puzzled by his symptoms but chalked it up to the trauma of being lost in the swamp. They kept him overnight for observation but released him the next day with instructions to rest. We never spoke about what really happened, not even among ourselves. It was as if, by tacit agreement, we decided to accept the simple explanation we'd given the rangers. Tyler claimed not to remember anything after leaving Samuel's cabin, and we didn't press him. Some memories are better left buried, but sometimes, in my dreams, I still hear her, Agatha, calling from the dark water. I see her milky eyes and her too wide smile. I wake sweating, my hand automatically reaching for the amulet I still wear. And sometimes I wonder about Eleanor, alone in her house on the island, keeping her endless vigil. I wonder how long she can continue, how many more victims she can save before her strength fails. I've researched the Blackwood sisters since our return. There are a few historical records, a mention of 2 sisters who practiced medicine in the Everglades during the 1880s, rumors of witchcraft, accounts of a drowning. Nothing conclusive, nothing that would convince a skeptic. But I know what I saw. I know what waits in the black water of the Fakahatchi. I haven't returned to the swamp. Not yet. But sometimes when city life becomes too monotonous, when the fluorescent lights and traffic noise grate on my nerves, I find myself pulling out maps of the Everglades, tracing possible routes to a certain pond. The wilderness calls, as Eleanor said it would. And deep down, I know that someday I'll answer. Someday I'll return to dead water, to see if Eleanor still keeps her watch, to see if Agatha still waits beneath the dark surface, to see if what happened was real, or just a shared delusion born of fear and exhaustion. Because some questions demand answers, even when we fear what those answers might be. Some mysteries pull at us until we have no choice but to confront them. And some places, once visited, never truly release their hold on us. The Fakahatchee Strand is such a place. Agatha Blackwood is such a mystery, and I am still wearing her sister's amulet. It's been 5 months since our encounter in the swamp. Mia has thrown herself into her photography, though she no longer shoots landscapes or wilderness scenes. Tyler and Danny broke up 2 weeks after we returned. Irreconcilable differences, Tyler called it, though I suspect it had more to do with what happened at Deadwater than either would admit. And me? I've been on leave from teaching, ostensibly to work on curriculum development, but in reality, I've been researching. Old newspaper archives, historical society records, Seminole legends, anything that might shed light on the Blackwood sisters and the entity in the pond. Last week, I received a package. No return address, but the postmark was from a small town at the edge of the Everglades. Inside was a journal, its leather cover cracked with age, its pages yellowed and brittle. The handwriting inside was elegant but faded. The journal of Eleanor Blackwood, dated 1884. I've been reading it obsessively, learning the truth about the sisters. How they came to the Everglades seeking plants with medicinal properties. How Agatha became obsessed with local legends of an entity in the deep water that granted power in exchange for sacrifice. How Eleanor tried to stop her sister's descent into darkness but failed. And on the final page, in handwriting different from the rest, fresher, more recent, a simple message. She stirs again. The binding weakens. I grow tired. Come if you will. Below it, a crude map showing a route through the Fakahatchee to Deadwater Pond. I haven't decided what to do yet. The rational part of my mind says to burn the journal, to forget everything that happened. But I keep touching the amulet around my neck, feeling its strange warmth. I keep thinking of Eleanor, alone in her endless task. Perhaps this is how Samuel began, with curiosity, with a sense of obligation. Perhaps this is how Eleanor's vigil will continue, through those who've glimpsed the truth and cannot turn away from it. I've bought a new backpack, new hiking boots. I've studied maps of the Fakahatchee more intently than I ever did before our first trip. I've even contacted a Seminole elder who knows the old stories, seeking wisdom and preparation. Tomorrow, I will decide. Return to safety and the comfortable lies we tell ourselves about the world's true nature, or venture back into the swamp to face whatever waits at dead water. Either way, I know Agatha is patient. If not me, she will call another. She will always call from the depths of her watery prison. And someone will always answer, because some horrors cannot be escaped, only confronted. Some evils cannot be destroyed, only contained. And sometimes the only thing standing between those horrors and the unsuspecting world is one person, willing to face the darkness so others don't have to. I don't know if I'm strong enough to be that person, but as I pack my gear and prepare for whatever tomorrow brings, I find myself reciting Eleanor's words like a mantra. Bound by blood, bound by water, bound by earth, bound by fire. And I wonder whose blood will bind Agatha next time. My name is Rebecca Lawson. I'm 32 years old, and tomorrow I return to the Fakahatchee Strand, to the place called Dead Water, to face what waits beneath the black surface. I don't know if I'll return. I don't know if these words will ever be read, but I need to leave a record in case someone else is called after me, in case someone else hears Agatha's voice in their dreams and feels compelled to seek her out. Know this, she is real. She is ancient, and she is hungry, but she can be fought. She can be bound, temporarily, and there are those who have dedicated their lives to this task. If you're reading this because you've heard her call, Because you've seen her milky eyes in your dreams, know that you're not alone. Others have walked this path before you. Whether I succeed or fail in what comes next, the vigil continues. It must continue. For if Agatha ever truly breaks free from her watery prison, if her hunger is ever fully unleashed upon the world, I can't bear to contemplate it. So I go to face her, to help Eleanor, to take up the mantle that Samuel once carried. I go not out of bravery, but out of necessity, because once you've seen behind the veil, you can never truly unsee it. Once you know what lurks in the dark water, you can never fully turn away. The Fakahachi calls, and I must answer. Remember, stay on the path. Keep to the light. And if you hear a woman crying in the night, if you feel drawn to dark water, run. Run, and don't look back. Unless, like me, you've been chosen. In which case you'll find Eleanor's house on the island in Deadwater Pond. And perhaps if I succeed, you'll find me there too, continuing the vigil, keeping the binding strong. Until then, beware the Lady of Deadwater. Beware Agatha Blackwood. And whatever you do, don't answer when she calls your name. My name is Rebecca Thorne. I'm 34 years old, and this happened in October of 2024, just 6 months ago, though sometimes it feels like yesterday, and other times like a lifetime has passed. I've always been the friend who plans everything, the organized one, the safety net. But there's no planning for what happened in the Apalachicola National Forest. Jen, Mia, and I had been friends since college, meeting as undergrads at Florida State University. We stayed close even as our lives took different paths. I became a high school science teacher in Tallahassee. Jen worked as a nurse in Jacksonville, and Mia ran a small but successful interior design business in Tampa. We tried to get together at least once a year, just the three of us. No husbands, no kids, no work calls. This year, I suggested something different from our usual beach weekend or city getaway. I wanted to try hiking and camping in the Apalachicola National Forest. Something primal, something to connect us with nature. I'm tired of the same old fancy hotels and tourist traps, I told them during our video call. Let's do something that challenges us. Jen was immediately on board. She'd been going through a tough divorce and needed an escape. Mia took more convincing. She wasn't exactly the outdoorsy type, but eventually, she agreed. It could inspire her designs, she reasoned, and besides, how bad could 3 days in the woods be? I spent weeks researching trails, camping gear, and safety tips. We decided on a route that would take us through some of the more remote areas of the forest, ending at Tate's Hell State Forest. The name should have been our first warning, but I dismissed it as local color. I picked them up from the Tallahassee airport on a crisp Friday morning. The weather forecast predicted clear skies, with temperatures dropping to around 50 degrees at night. Perfect camping weather. "You look like shit," was the first thing Jen said when she saw me. Her blunt manner was one of the things I loved about her. At 5'10" with short-cropped blonde hair, Jen had always been the most physically imposing of our trio and the most willing to speak her mind. "Thanks," I replied, pulling her in for a hug. "Haven't been sleeping well." The truth was, I'd been having nightmares for weeks, dreams of being lost in the woods, of something following me, watching me. But I didn't mention that. This trip was supposed to be a fresh start, a cleansing. Mia arrived an hour later, looking like she'd stepped out of an REI catalog with brand new hiking boots and a matching outfit. "Don't judge," she said, noticing our expressions. "If I'm going to rough it, I'm going to at least look good doing it." Mia had always been the fashionable one, with her perfectly styled brown hair and manicured nails. I wondered how long those nails would stay perfect in the wilderness. We loaded my Subaru with our gear and headed south. The drive was filled with catching up, gossip, and the kind of laughter that only comes from years of shared history. By the time we reached the trailhead parking lot, any reservations I had were forgotten. The Apalachicola National Forest is the largest in Florida, spanning over 500,000 acres. We were entering from a remote access point near the community of Sumatra, planning to hike about 15 miles over 3 days. Not too ambitious for beginners, but enough to give us a genuine wilderness experience. As we shouldered our packs and adjusted our straps, a pickup truck pulled into the otherwise empty lot. An older man with leathery skin and a scraggly gray beard stepped out. He wore faded overalls and a John Deere cap. He watched us for a moment before approaching. "Y'all heading into the deep woods?" he asked, his voice rough like he'd smoked a pack a day for decades. "Yes, sir," I replied, "going to camp for a few days." He nodded slowly, eyes scanning our gear. "Might want to stick to the marked trails. Easy to get turned around out there." "We've got maps and GPS," I assured him, patting my pocket where my phone sat. "GPS don't always work right in these parts," he said, "and watch out for Evangeline's Creek. They say old Evangeline Blackwell still haunts those waters." Jen snorted beside me. "Is that the local ghost story?" The man's eyes hardened. "Ain't no story. Evangeline was a witch back in the 1800s. They drowned her in that creek, but she cursed the land with her dying breath. Said anyone who disturbs her rest would feel her wrath." "We'll be careful," I said, wanting to be polite. "See that you are," he replied. "And if you hear whistling at night, don't answer it. That's her calling." With that cryptic warning, he returned to his truck and drove away. "Well, that wasn't ominous at all," Mia said, adjusting her designer sunglasses. "Just a local trying to scare the tourists," Jen said. "Let's go." We set off down the trail, the dense forest quickly closing around us. The October air was cool and fresh, the sunlight filtering through the leaves in dappled patterns. Live oaks, cypress trees, and pines created a diverse canopy above us, while palmetto bushes and ferns crowded the forest floor. The first few hours were everything I'd hoped for. We saw a pair of deer, spotted woodpeckers, and even caught a glimpse of a fox. The conversation flowed easily between serious catching up and ridiculous jokes. We stopped for lunch beside a small stream, where Mia complained about the lack of bathroom facilities, making Jen and me laugh until our sides hurt. "How far to the first campsite?" Mia asked as we packed up after lunch. I checked my map. "About 3 more miles. We'll be there well before sunset." We continued on, but as the afternoon wore on, the forest began to change subtly. The underbrush grew thicker, and the trees seemed to press closer to the trail. The bird calls that had accompanied us earlier fell silent. "Is it just me, or did it get colder?" Jen asked, zipping up her jacket. She was right. The temperature had dropped significantly, though the sun was still visible through the trees. "Probably just this section of the forest," I said. "More shade, less sunlight." But something felt off. The trail markers, which had been consistent earlier, now seemed farther apart. I found myself checking my phone's GPS more frequently, only to find that the signal was increasingly unreliable. By the time we reached our first designated campsite, the sun was already beginning to set, casting long shadows through the trees. I was relieved to find the small clearing exactly where it was supposed to be, with a crude fire ring of stones at its center. "Home sweet home," I announced, dropping my pack with a grateful sigh. We set up our tents efficiently, with me giving instructions to Mia, who had never assembled one before. Jen gathered firewood while I set up our cooking equipment. By the time darkness fell, we had a small but steady fire going, and our 3 tents, one for each of us, formed a semicircle around it. The freeze-dried camping meals I'd brought weren't gourmet, but after a day of hiking, they tasted amazing. We sat around the fire, eating and passing around a flask of whiskey Jen had smuggled in. "To wilderness women," Jen toasted, raising the flask. "To new experiences," Mia added. "To old friends," I finished, taking a swig of the burning liquid. As the fire crackled and the night deepened, we shared deeper stories. Jen talked about her failing marriage, how her husband had slowly become a stranger over the past 10 years. "I came home from a night shift and found him sitting in the dark," she said, her voice hollow. "He looked at me like he didn't know who I was. That's when I knew it was over." Mia confessed her business was struggling more than she let on. I might have to close the studio, she admitted. The economy's hit luxury services hard. I shared my own recent troubles, the growing sense of dissatisfaction with my teaching job, the feeling that I was stuck in a rut. Sometimes I feel like I'm just going through the motions, I said. Like life is happening around me, but not to me. The conversation gradually drifted to lighter topics as the whiskey warmed our blood. By the time we decided to turn in, the fire had burned down to glowing embers, and the forest around us was utterly dark and silent. Inside my tent, I snuggled into my sleeping bag and listened to the night sounds, the occasional rustle of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl, the soft breathing of my friends in their nearby tents. Despite the hard ground beneath me, I felt myself drifting off, more relaxed than I'd been in months. I don't know how long I'd been asleep when the whistling started. It wasn't loud, just a soft, melodic tune that seemed to weave through the trees. In my half-asleep state, I thought it might be the wind, or perhaps Jen or Mia stepping out to use the bathroom. But as I became more awake, I realized the sound was too deliberate, too musical to be anything natural. I sat up in my sleeping bag, straining to hear. The whistling continued, sometimes seeming to come from one direction, sometimes from another. I unzipped my tent a few inches and peered out. The clearing was bathed in moonlight, the ashes of our fire still faintly glowing. Mia's and Jen's tents appeared undisturbed. The whistling stopped suddenly. The silence that followed was somehow worse, expectant, like the forest was holding its breath. I was about to zip my tent back up when I saw it, a figure at the edge of the clearing. It was difficult to make out details in the darkness, but it appeared to be a woman in a long dress. She stood perfectly still, facing our campsite. Though I couldn't see her face clearly, I had the distinct impression she was staring directly at me. I blinked, and she was gone, my heart hammering. I closed my tent and tried to convince myself it had been a trick of the moonlight, a shadow cast by a tree. I lay back down, but sleep was now impossible. I kept thinking about the old man's warning. If you hear whistling at night, don't answer it. That's her calling. Eventually, exhaustion overcame fear, and I drifted into an uneasy sleep. Morning brought sunlight and normalcy. As we prepared breakfast over a fresh fire, I debated whether to mention what I'd seen. "Did either of you hear anything strange last night?" I finally asked. "Like whistling?" Mia and Jen exchanged glances. "I thought I was dreaming it," Mia said slowly. "A sort of tune. It kept going on and off." "I heard it too," Jen admitted. "Figured it was just the wind." I hesitated, then told them about the figure I'd seen. "Okay, that old guy at the trailhead totally got in your head," Jen said, but I could see she was unsettled. "Maybe we should head back," Mia suggested, nervously twisting her hair. "And let some local legend ruin our trip," I said, suddenly feeling defensive of my planning. "It was probably just another hiker." "In the middle of the night? Standing at the edge of our camp without saying anything?" Jen raised an eyebrow. "Look, we came out here to challenge ourselves, right? So far, all we've done is walk a few miles and camp in a designated spot. I say we stick to the plan." After some discussion, we agreed to continue. The day was bright and clear, which made the previous night's fears seem silly. We broke camp and hit the trail by mid-morning. Our route for the day would take us deeper into the forest, to a more remote camping area near what the map labeled as Evangeline's Creek. Given what we'd experienced, the name made us all a bit uneasy, but none of us wanted to admit it. The hiking was more challenging than the previous day. The trail became less defined in places, forcing us to check our position more frequently. My phone's GPS was increasingly unreliable, showing us jumping from one location to another, sometimes miles from where we should be. "I thought you said this was a well-marked trail," Mia complained as we stopped for the third time in an hour to consult the map. "It was supposed to be," I said, frustration edging my voice. "The guide said this was suitable for beginners. Maybe we should turn back, Jen suggested. I was about to agree when we heard it, the sound of rushing water ahead. That must be the creek, I said, relief washing over me. If we can find that, we can find our campsite. We pushed forward with renewed energy. The sound of water grew louder, and eventually the trees thinned to reveal a beautiful creek, perhaps 20 feet across, with clear water rushing over smooth stones. Evangeline's Creek, I presume, Jen said, dropping her pack and stretching. The creek was picturesque, bordered by cypress trees draped with Spanish moss that swayed gently in the breeze. Despite its ominous name, it looked perfectly ordinary, inviting even. According to my map, our campsite should have been about 100 yards upstream. We followed the creek bank until we found another clearing, smaller than the previous night's but adequate for our needs. As Mia and I set up the tents, Jen ventured to the creek to refill our water bottles with the purification system we'd brought. "Guys," she called after a few minutes, "you should come see this." We joined her at the creek's edge. She was pointing to something on the opposite bank, a small structure hidden among the trees. It looked like a crude shelter made of sticks and moss, with strange symbols carved into the wood. "What is that?" Mia asked. "Looks like some kind of shrine," I replied, though the word felt inadequate for the unsettling structure. "Let's check it out," Jen said, already scanning the creek for a crossing point. "I don't think that's a good idea," I said, but Jen was already picking her way across using exposed rocks as stepping stones. Mia and I exchanged glances before reluctantly following. The creek wasn't deep, but the rocks were slippery, and the current stronger than it appeared. By the time we reached the other side, the bottoms of our pants were soaked. The shrine, if that's what it was, looked even stranger up close. It was about 4 feet tall and constructed in a way that reminded me of a bird's nest, but with intentional design. The symbols carved into the wood were unlike anything I'd seen before. Not letters or numbers, but complex patterns that seemed to twist and move if you looked at them too long. Inside the structure was a small platform, upon which sat 3 objects: a doll made of what looked like human hair, a jar containing a dark liquid, and a book bound in what appeared to be leather, its pages yellowed with age. "Don't touch anything," I warned as Jen reached toward the book. "I just want to see what it says," she replied, carefully lifting the cover. The pages were filled with handwritten text in faded ink. Some passages were in English, others in what might have been Latin or another language I didn't recognize. The English portions described rituals and contained what appeared to be journal entries. "Listen to this," Jen said, reading from the page. "October 15th, 1871. They fear me now, as they should. The woman who drowned me, Sarah Miller, found her precious daughter wandering into the creek last night. The child now resides with me in the spaces between. Soon I will have enough souls to return fully." "Okay, that's enough," Mia said, backing away. "This is seriously creepy, and we shouldn't be messing with it." "It's probably just some elaborate prank," I said, though I didn't believe my own words. "Local kids trying to scare hikers." "These don't look like recent additions to me," Jen said, gesturing to the weathered wood and aged book. "This stuff has been here a while." As we stood debating, the air grew noticeably colder. The sunlight seemed to dim, though there wasn't a cloud in the sky. The creek's pleasant burbling suddenly sounded more like whispers. "Let's go back to our camp," I said, unable to shake the feeling that we were being watched. We crossed the creek again and hurried back to our campsite. As we prepared dinner, we tried to joke about what we'd found, but our laughter was forced. None of us wanted to admit how unsettled we felt. Night fell quickly, bringing with it a heavy mist that rolled in from the creek. Our fire sputtered and smoked, refusing to burn properly despite the dry wood. The temperature dropped sharply, forcing us to put on every layer we'd brought. "Maybe coming out here wasn't such a great idea," I admitted as we huddled around the struggling fire. "You think?" Mia said, her teeth chattering. "I could be in a nice hotel right now with room service and central heating." We'll head back first thing tomorrow, I promised. Cut the trip short. Good plan, Jen agreed, unusually subdued. We didn't stay up late. The cold and the unsettling atmosphere drove us to our tents early, each of us hoping that sleep would come quickly and morning would arrive soon. I lay in my sleeping bag, listening to the night sounds. The creek seemed louder somehow, its rushing water forming patterns that almost sounded like words. I tried to ignore it, to focus on my breathing, but sleep remained elusive. Then the whistling started again. It was the same tune as the previous night, but closer now. I sat up, heart pounding. I didn't want to look outside, didn't want to see what might be waiting in the moonlight. But some compulsion drew me to the tent zipper. I opened it just enough to peek out. The mist had thickened, swirling around our campsite in unnatural patterns. Through the fog, I could make out a figure standing by the creek, the same woman I'd seen the night before. This time she was closer and I could see more details. She wore a long, old-fashioned dress, soaking wet and clinging to her thin frame. Her hair hung in dark, dripping strands around a face that was unnaturally pale. Though she was at least 30 feet away, I could see her eyes clearly. Black pools without whites, fixed directly on me. Her lips weren't moving, but the whistling continued. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I wanted to wake Jen and Mia to have them confirm what I was seeing, but I was frozen in place. The woman began to move toward our camp, her movements jerky and wrong, like a marionette controlled by an unskilled puppeteer. She stopped at the edge of our campsite. The whistling ceased. "Rebecca," she said, her voice like water flowing over stones. "Come to me, Rebecca." My name in her mouth was like ice down my spine. I hadn't told anyone my name out here except Jen and Mia. "Who are you?" I managed to whisper. "You know who I am," she replied. "You visited my home today. Touched my things." "Evangeline," I breathed. She smiled, her teeth black in the moonlight. "The water is waiting for you, Rebecca. It's been so long since I've had a teacher join me." I closed the tent, my hands shaking so badly I could barely manage the zipper. I crawled deep into my sleeping bag, covering my head like a child hiding from monsters. I prayed for morning, for sunlight to banish the horrors of the night. I must have fallen asleep eventually because the next thing I knew, Mia was shaking me awake. "Beck, wake up. Something's wrong with Jen." I scrambled out of my tent to find Mia standing outside, her face ashen. Jen's tent was open, her sleeping bag empty. "She's gone," Mia said. I woke up to use the bathroom and checked on her because I heard sounds from her tent earlier, but she's not there. "Maybe she just went to the creek to get water," I suggested, though my stomach was already knotting with dread. "Her boots are still here," Mia pointed to Jen's hiking boots neatly placed outside her tent. "And it's freezing. She wouldn't go anywhere without them." We called for Jen, our voices echoing through the morning mist that still clung to the forest. There was no response. "We need to find her," I said, pulling on my jacket. "She can't have gone far." We searched the area around our campsite, calling Jen's name repeatedly. No response, no sign of disturbance. It was as if she had simply vanished. "The creek," Mia said suddenly. "Maybe she went back to that shrine." We hurried to the creek, following its bank upstream and downstream. The water seemed higher than the day before, flowing faster and darker. The mist was thicker here, swirling around us in ways that defied the slight breeze. "Jen!" I shouted, my voice bouncing off the trees. "Jen! There!" Mia pointed across the creek, where a figure was emerging from the mist. Relief flooded through me as I recognized Jen's tall form and short blonde hair. "Jen, where have you been? We were worried sick." She didn't respond, just stood on the opposite bank watching us. Something about her posture was off. Too rigid, too still. "Jen?" I called again, uneasiness creeping back. "Are you okay?" She finally moved, stepping forward to the creek's edge. Her feet were bare, I noticed, and her pajamas were soaking wet. "The water is beautiful," she said, her voice flat and distant. "You should come in. The water wants you both." Mia gripped my arm. Something's wrong with her. Jen smiled, but it wasn't her smile. It was too wide, too fixed. "Nothing's wrong. Everything is finally right. Evangeline showed me the truth. She's waiting for you." "Jen, you're scaring us," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Why don't you come back to camp? We'll pack up and head home." "Home?" Jen tilted her head at an unnatural angle. "My home is here now, with her, in the water." Before we could respond, Jen turned and walked back into the mist, disappearing among the trees. "We have to go after her," Mia said, already looking for a place to cross the creek. I grabbed her arm. "Wait, that's not Jen. Not really." "What are you talking about? Of course it's Jen. Did you see her eyes? Her smile? The way she moved? Something's happened to her." Mia stared at me, fear and confusion warring on her face. "What do we do? We can't just leave her." "We need help," I decided. "Real help. We'll go back to the trailhead, find that ranger station we passed on the way in." "That's like 10 miles back." "I know, but we can't handle this ourselves. Whatever's happening here, it's beyond us." Reluctantly, Mia agreed. We returned to camp and hastily packed our essentials, leaving the tents and some of our heavier gear behind. We'd come back for it later with help. As we shouldered our lightened packs, I noticed something on the ground near Jen's tent, her phone. The screen was cracked, and when I picked it up, water dripped from the case. "She must have dropped it in the creek," Mia said, but I wasn't so sure. The damage looked deliberate. We set off down the trail, moving as quickly as we could while still being cautious. The mist followed us, seeming to thicken whenever we slowed or stopped to check our bearings. My phone's GPS was completely useless now, the map showing us in locations that made no sense. "Are you sure this is the right way?" Mia asked after we'd been walking for what felt like hours. "Nothing looks familiar." She was right, the trail had changed somehow. The markers we'd followed on the way in were gone, and the path itself seemed narrower, choked with underbrush that hadn't been there before. "We must have taken a wrong turn," I said, trying to hide my growing panic. "Let's backtrack to the creek and try again." But when we turned around, the path behind us looked different too. The forest had closed in around us, the trees pressing closer, their branches interwoven like they were deliberately blocking our way. "This is impossible," Mia whispered. "Forests don't just change." I didn't have an answer for her. We were lost, our technology useless, our friend missing or worse. I felt tears of frustration burning behind my eyes, but forced them back. I needed to stay strong, to think clearly. "Let's try to find high ground," I suggested. "If we can get above these trees, maybe we can spot the road or the ranger station." We pushed through the underbrush, no longer following any discernible path. The going was tough, with thorns tearing at our clothes and branches whipping our faces. Mia stumbled several times, cursing as her designer hiking boots proved inadequate for the rough terrain. After what seemed like endless struggling, we emerged onto a small ridge that offered a partial view above the tree line. What we saw made my blood run cold. Forest stretched in every direction, with no sign of roads, buildings, or open land. But it wasn't just the endless trees that disturbed me. It was their arrangement. From our elevated position, I could see patterns in the forest layout, circular clearings connected by straight lines, forming symbols similar to those we'd seen carved into the shrine. "That's not natural," Mia said, her voice barely audible. "Someone made those." "Or something," I added, unable to keep the dread from my voice. The sun was already beginning its descent, though it felt like we'd only been walking for a few hours. Time seemed to be moving differently here, stretching and compressing in ways that defied logic. "We need to find shelter before dark," I said. "We'll never make it out of here tonight." "I'm not spending another night in these woods," Mia protested. "Not after what happened to Jen." "We don't have a choice. We're lost, and it'll be dark soon. Our best bet is to find a defensible spot and wait for daylight." Reluctantly, Mia agreed. We made our way down from the ridge, searching for a suitable place to camp. Eventually, we found a small clearing backed by a rock face, which at least meant nothing could approach from behind. We had no tent, having left them behind, but we still had our sleeping bags and some emergency supplies. I managed to start a small fire, though the wood was damp and smoked more than it burned. As we sat beside the meager flames, sharing the last of our protein bars, I tried to make sense of what was happening. "Do you think it's real?" I asked Mia. "What that old man told us about Evangeline." 24 hours ago, I would have said no," she replied, huddling closer to the fire. "Now, I don't know what to believe. If it is real, what does she want? Why did she take Jen? Revenge, maybe. The old man said she cursed anyone who disturbed her rest, and we did disturb that shrine." I nodded slowly. "But why Jen? Why not one of us?" "Maybe she was just first," Mia said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Maybe we're next." The thought hung between us, too terrible to dwell on. As darkness fell completely, we huddled together in our sleeping bags, the fire our only protection against the encroaching night. Unlike the previous nights, the forest wasn't silent. Strange calls echoed through the trees. Not animal sounds, but not quite human either. And beneath it all, like a constant background noise, was the sound of water rushing, though we were nowhere near the creek. "Do you hear that?" Mia asked, her face ghostly in the firelight. "The water?" "Yes. It sounds like it's getting closer." She was right. The sound of rushing water was growing louder, surrounding us from all sides. I shone my flashlight into the trees, but there was no sign of water, just darkness between the trunks. Then the whistling started again, that same haunting tune weaving through the forest like a physical presence. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, making it impossible to pinpoint its source. "Don't leave the fire," I told Mia, gripping her hand tightly. "No matter what happens, stay by the fire." The whistling grew louder, and with it, the sound of water. The mist, that had been our constant companion all day, thickened into a dense fog, swirling around our small clearing in unnatural patterns. Through the fog, I began to see shapes, human figures moving just beyond the reach of our firelight. "Oh God," Mia whimpered beside me, "they're surrounding us." There were at least a dozen figures in the mist, all women in old-fashioned dresses, their hair and clothes dripping wet. They moved in slow circles around our clearing, never coming closer, never retreating, just watching with those same black eyes I'd seen on the woman by the creek. And then Jen stepped into the light. She looked almost normal at first glance, the same Jen I'd known for years. But her movements were wrong, too fluid and yet somehow jerky, like she wasn't fully in control of her own body. Her eyes, once warm brown, were now black pools like those of the figures in the mist. "Hello, Rebecca," she said, her voice overlaid with another, older voice. "Hello, Mia." "Jen," I managed, my throat tight with fear. "Fight it. Whatever's controlling you, fight it." She smiled that terrible, too-wide smile. "There's nothing to fight. Evangeline has shown me the truth. She's shown me freedom." "This isn't freedom," Mia said. "Look at yourself. You're a puppet." Jen's expression flickered for a moment, something like confusion crossing her face, but it was quickly replaced by that fixed smile. "The water is rising," she said. "It will claim all these woods eventually. Evangeline's domain grows with each soul she takes." "We saw your shrine," I said, trying a different approach. "The book, the record of what you've done. Is that how you talked to her, Jen? Did she make you write in it?" Again, that flicker of confusion. I don't... "Remember who you are," I pressed. "Remember Jen, the nurse from Jacksonville. Remember your brother's wedding last year, how you danced until your feet were blistered. Remember the time we got lost in downtown Atlanta and ended up at that weird underground jazz club." Jen blinked rapidly, her posture changing subtly. "Beck? What's happening? I can't." "Fight it, Jen," I urged, hope surging through me. "Come back to us." For a moment, I thought it was working. Jen's eyes cleared slightly, her unnatural stance softening. But then her expression hardened again, and when she spoke next, it wasn't Jen's voice at all. "Enough," said Evangeline through Jen's mouth. "She is mine now, as you will be." The figures in the mist began to close in, their circle tightening around our clearing. The fire sputtered and dimmed, though there was no wind. "Run," I told Mia, pulling her to her feet. "Now!" We bolted for the gap between two of the approaching figures, pushing through the thick mist. I felt cold, wet hands grab at my clothes, my hair, but I kept moving, dragging Mia with me. Behind us, I heard Jen, or what used to be Jen, screaming in rage. We crashed through the underbrush blindly, branches whipping our faces, roots threatening to trip us with every step. I had no idea where we were going. I only knew we had to get away from that clearing, from those figures, from whatever Evangeline was. The mist followed us, thick tendrils wrapping around trees and reaching for us like living things. The sound of rushing water grew deafening, and the whistling, that awful, haunting whistling, seemed to come from inside my own head. I don't know how long we ran. Time lost all meaning in the fog-shrouded forest. But eventually, we emerged onto the bank of a wider, deeper section of the creek than we'd seen before. The water ran black in the darkness, moving too fast for the gentle slope it traversed. "We can't cross that," Mia gasped, bent double as she tried to catch her breath. "We have to," I replied, scanning the bank for any possible crossing point. "They're right behind us." As if summoned by my words, the figures emerged from the mist behind us, led by Jen. They moved more purposefully now, their earlier circling replaced by direct pursuit. "There's no escape," Jen called, her voice still that terrible mix of her own and something older, darker. "The forest is hers. The water is rising. Join us willingly, and the transition will be easier." "Go to hell!" Mia shouted back, her fear giving way to anger. I spotted a fallen tree spanning the creek about 20 yards downstream. It wasn't ideal. The trunk was narrow and slick with moss, but it was our only option. "There," I said, grabbing Mia's arm. "We can cross there." We made for the makeshift bridge, moving as quickly as we dared on the slippery bank. The shapes behind us, I couldn't think of them as women anymore, quickened their pace, their movements becoming more frantic as they sensed our attempt to escape. We reached the fallen tree, and I gestured for Mia to go first. "Quick, but careful," I urged. "Don't look down, don't look back." Mia nodded, her face pale but determined. She straddled the trunk and began to inch her way across, using her hands for balance. The creek rushed below, unnaturally loud and violent for its size. I followed right behind her, trying to focus only on the back of her head and not on the dark water beneath or the horrors behind. We were about halfway across when the whistling started again, so close it seemed to come from right beside my ear. I flinched, nearly losing my balance. "Don't listen to it," I called to Mia. "Keep moving." The trunk shifted slightly beneath us, though there was no obvious reason why it should. From the corner of my eye, I saw pale hands reaching up from the water, pushing at the log. Not hands, things like hands, with too many joints and fingers that bent in impossible directions. "Hurry!" I shouted, my voice cracking with terror. Mia scrambled forward faster, her movements becoming less cautious as panic overtook her. She was almost to the other side when her foot slipped. She screamed, her body twisting as she fought to regain her balance. For a terrible moment, she teetered on the edge of the trunk, arms windmilling wildly. I lunged forward, grabbing her wrist with both hands. The sudden movement sent me sliding to the side of the trunk, one leg dangling over the rushing water. Something cold and wet wrapped around my ankle. One of those terrible hands from the creek. "Pull up!" I gasped, fighting against the grip that was trying to drag me into the water. Mia managed to stabilize herself and grabbed onto a branch extending from the fallen tree. With her newly secured position, she was able to help pull me back up onto the trunk. The hand around my ankle tightened painfully, but as I cleared the water, it had to release me or be pulled out of the creek itself. We made it to the other side, collapsing onto the bank in exhaustion and terror. Behind us, on the opposite shore, the figures had reached the fallen tree. Jen, or the thing wearing Jen's form, stood at the front, her black eyes fixed on us with cold fury. "You cannot escape," she called across the water. "The forest is hers. The water is everywhere." As if in response to her words, the fallen tree suddenly shifted, rolling into the creek with a tremendous splash. Our bridge was gone. "We need to keep moving," I said, pulling Mia to her feet. "They'll find another way across." We plunged into the forest again, the oppressive mist swirling around us. The sound of rushing water followed us, sometimes fading, sometimes growing louder, as if the creek were somehow all around us, changing its course to pursue us through the trees. Our only advantage now was that we could no longer see our pursuers directly. The dark forest and thick fog hid them from view, but also hid potential dangers from us. More than once, we nearly ran headlong into a tree or stumbled into a hidden ditch. "Do you think we're going the right way?" Mia gasped as we paused briefly to catch our breath. "I don't know," I admitted. "I'm just trying to put distance between us and them." "What about Jen? We can't just leave her." The question hit me like a physical blow. Jen, my friend for over a decade, taken by something I couldn't comprehend. But the thing we'd seen at the creek, the thing that had spoken with two voices, that wasn't Jen anymore. "That's not Jen," I said, voicing my thoughts. "Not anymore. Whatever Evangeline is, she's taken over. The real Jen is—" I couldn't finish the sentence. Mia's eyes filled with tears. No, I refused to believe that. There must be a way to get her back. Before I could respond, the whistling started again, fainter now, but still distinctly audible through the trees. It was coming from the right, so we veered left, pushing through a particularly dense section of underbrush. We emerged onto what appeared to be an actual trail, narrow and overgrown, but definitely man-made. Signs of machete cuts on branches and the occasional boot print in the mud suggested it was used, if not frequently. "A trail," Mia breathed, hope lighting her features. "This has to lead somewhere, right?" "Let's follow it," I agreed. At the very least, it would be easier going than forcing our way through the undergrowth. The trail wound through the forest, occasionally branching. We always chose the path that seemed most worn, hoping it would lead to civilization, or at least to the edge of the forest. The mist remained our constant companion, but the sounds of pursuit had faded, giving us a fragile sense of security. After what felt like hours of walking, the trail widened and the trees began to thin. Ahead, barely visible through the fog, I could make out structures, buildings of some kind. "A town?" Mia whispered, clutching my arm. "Maybe a ranger station or campground," I replied, hardly daring to hope. As we drew closer, my heart sank. It wasn't a town or a ranger station. It was a small collection of abandoned buildings, the remains of what might have once been a logging camp or a small settlement. The structures were in various states of decay, some little more than foundations with a few walls standing, others relatively intact but clearly long deserted. "Great," Mia muttered. "A ghost town in a haunted forest. Perfect." "At least it's shelter," I pointed out, "and there might be a radio or some supplies we can use." We approached cautiously, alert for any signs of danger. The settlement consisted of about a dozen buildings arranged around what had once been a central square. Most appeared to be small cabins or workshops, with one larger structure that might have been a meeting hall or store. The largest building seemed to be in the best condition, so we headed for it first. The door hung open on rusted hinges, creaking ominously as a breeze pushed it back and forth. Inside, dust covered every surface and cobwebs hung from the ceiling beams. It had indeed been some kind of store or trading post. Shelves lined the walls, though most were empty or held only broken glass and unidentifiable debris. A counter ran along the back, with what appeared to be a living area behind it. "Hello?" I called out, though I expected no answer. "Anyone here?" Silence was the only response, broken only by the distant sound of water and the low moan of wind through the abandoned buildings. We searched the store methodically, looking for anything useful. In a back room, we found some canned goods that were so old the labels had faded to illegibility. A rusted toolbox yielded a hammer and a few nails. Not much, but better than nothing. "Look at this," Mia said, pointing to something on the wall behind the counter. It was a map, yellowed with age and partially rotted, but still legible in places. It showed the forest and surrounding areas, with the settlement, labeled as Blackwell's Crossing, clearly marked. "Blackwell," I repeated. "Like Evangeline Blackwell?" "Must be related," Mia said, studying the map. "Look, there's Evangeline's Creek, and this might be the road back to the trailhead, but it's hard to tell with all this damage." I examined the map more closely. If Mia was right about the road, it was only a few miles east of our current position. But between us and potential safety lay an area marked with an ominous symbol I didn't recognize. A circle with intricate patterns inside it, similar to the carvings we'd seen on the shrine. "What's that supposed to be?" I asked, pointing to the symbol. "No idea," Mia replied. "But if that's the road, we should head east at first light." "Agreed. For now, let's secure this building as best we can and try to get some rest." We used the hammer and nails to reinforce the door and shutters, though the rotten wood didn't inspire much confidence. We cleared a space in the center of the main room, as far from the windows and doors as possible, and laid out our sleeping bags. Neither of us suggested keeping watch. We both knew sleep would be nearly impossible anyway. We sat in silence for a long time, listening to the sounds of the abandoned settlement, the creak of weathered boards, the whisper of the wind, and always in the background the sound of running water. "Do you think we'll make it out?" Mia asked finally, her voice small in the darkness. "Yes," I said with more confidence than I felt. "We'll follow the map to the road and get help. For Jen." "For Jen," she echoed. Eventually, exhaustion overtook fear, and we drifted into uneasy sleep. My dreams were fragmented and terrifying. Black water rising from the floorboards, pale hands reaching from the shadows, Jen's face transforming into something inhuman as she whispered my name. I woke suddenly, heart hammering, unsure what had disturbed me. The abandoned store was dark and quiet. Too quiet. The ever-present sound of water that had followed us through the forest had stopped. "Mia," I whispered, reaching for where she should have been beside me. My hand met empty space. Her sleeping bag was there, but Mia was gone. "Mia!" I called, louder now, fumbling for my flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing an empty room. No sign of struggle, no indication of where she might have gone. I got to my feet, checking the door and windows. They were still secured as we'd left them. How had she gotten out? And why would she leave without waking me? A floorboard creaked overhead. Someone, or something, was moving on the second floor. "Mia, is that you?" I called, directing my flashlight toward the stairs. No answer, but the creaking continued. Slow, deliberate footsteps moving across the ceiling. Then another sound joined it. Soft, melodic whistling. Fear paralyzed me for a moment. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to get out of the building immediately. But I couldn't leave without Mia. I had already lost Jen. I couldn't abandon another friend. Gathering my courage, I approached the stairs. They looked dangerously rotted, but they were the only way up to the second floor. I tested the first step carefully, then the second. They creaked, but held my weight. The whistling stopped as I reached the halfway point, replaced by the sound of rushing water. It seemed to be coming from everywhere at once: the walls, the ceiling, the floor beneath my feet. The second floor was a single large room. probably used for storage in the building's active days. Moonlight filtered through holes in the roof, casting strange patterns on the dusty floor. At first glance, the room appeared empty. Then I saw her, a woman standing in the far corner, her back to me. She wore a long, white dress, her dark hair hanging loose down her back. She was perfectly still, facing the wall. "Mia!" I called, my voice barely a whisper. The figure turned slowly. It wasn't Mia. It wasn't even human, not really. The face was that of a woman, but wrong, somehow. The proportions skewed, the eyes too large and entirely black, the mouth stretched in an impossible smile. Water dripped constantly from her hair and clothes, pooling around her feet, yet never diminishing. Evangeline. It had to be. "Where's Mia?" I demanded, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. "She came to me willingly," the thing said, its voice like stones grinding together. "Like Jennifer before her, like all who enter my forest eventually do." "You're lying. Mia wouldn't go willingly." The creature's smile widened further, splitting its face in a way no human mouth could. Perhaps not willingly then, but she was easy to call. So concerned for her friend, so eager to help. Horror washed over me as I realized what had happened. "You used Jen to lure her out." "Such loyal friends you have, Rebecca," it said, my name like poison in its mouth. "They both came when they heard you calling for help." "I never called for help," I said, backing toward the stairs. They heard what I wanted them to hear. The thing took a step forward, water sloshing around its feet. "As you will soon." I turned and ran for the stairs, but they were no longer there. The entire staircase had vanished, leaving a gaping hole in the floor. Below, the main room of the store was now filled with black water, rising slowly toward the second floor. "There is no escape," Evangeline said from behind me. "The water rises. It always rises." I backed away from the edge, looking frantically for another way out. The roof was damaged in places. If I could reach one of the larger holes, maybe I could climb out. "You cannot escape what is already inside you," the creature said, seemingly reading my thoughts. "The water is in your blood now. It has been since you first heard my call." "I don't believe you," I said, but even as I spoke I felt a strange sensation in my extremities, a cold numbness creeping up from my fingers and toes. "Listen," it commanded. "Listen to the water." And I could hear it. Not just the water rising in the room below, but water flowing through my veins, rushing in my ears. The sound grew louder, drowning out all other thoughts. "No," I shouted, clutching my head. "This isn't real. You're not real." The thing laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "I am more real than you can comprehend. I have existed in these waters for centuries. I was old when the first settlers came. I will remain when the last human is gone." The water below had reached the second floor and was beginning to spill over the edge. It moved wrong, flowing uphill in defiance of gravity, seeking me out specifically. I backed away until I hit the wall. There was nowhere left to go. Evangeline approached slowly, savoring my fear. As she drew nearer, her appearance shifted subtly. Flashes of Jen's features, then Mia's, then back to the terrible inhuman face. "Your friends are part of me now," she said. "Join them, Rebecca. The water welcomes you." The numbness had reached my knees and elbows, making movement increasingly difficult. The rushing sound in my head was deafening now. I slid down the wall, no longer able to remain standing. Evangeline stood over me, water cascading from her form to mingle with the flood rising through the floor. She reached out one pale, dripping hand toward my face. "No," I managed, the word barely audible through lips that were going numb. "I won't give in." The thing paused, its head tilting at an impossible angle. "You have no choice." "There's always a choice," I said, forcing the words out. "And I choose to fight." With what little strength remained in my arms, I reached for the flashlight I'd dropped when the numbness began. My fingers closed around it just as Evangeline's hand touched my cheek, cold and wet and wrong. "Your light cannot harm me," she hissed. "I am the darkness between stars, the depths no light can reach." But it wasn't the light I was after. It was the weight of the heavy metal flashlight in my hand. With every ounce of strength I had left, I swung it at the creature's head. To my shock, it connected. Evangeline shrieked, a sound that vibrated through the rotting building and sent ripples across the rising water. She staggered back, her form flickering like a bad television signal. For a moment, I saw through her disguise, not a woman at all, but something older, something that had never been human. A glimpse of scales, of too many limbs, of a mouth filled with needle-like teeth. Then she was the woman in the white dress again, but her perfect facade had cracked. "You cannot fight me," she snarled, but there was uncertainty in her voice now. The numbness had receded slightly, allowing me to struggle to my feet. "I already am." She lunged at me, fingers elongating into claw-like appendages. I dodged to the side, swinging the flashlight again. This time I missed, and her claws raked across my arm, leaving burning trails of pain. I stumbled, nearly falling into the rising water. It was halfway up the second floor now, covering the floorboards in an inch of black liquid that moved with purpose, reaching for my feet. Evangeline circled me, her movements becoming less human, more predatory. "You are alone, Rebecca. No one to help you, no one to save you." "She's not alone." The voice came from behind Evangeline, a familiar voice that made my heart skip a beat. Mia stood in the water, her clothes soaked, her eyes clear and determined. "Mia?" I gasped, not daring to hope. "Is it really you?" "It's me," she said, her gaze fixed on Evangeline. "I heard her calling, using your voice, but when I got close enough, I saw through it." Evangeline whirled to face this new threat, her form rippling with rage. "Impossible! The water claimed you." "Not quite," Mia said. She held up something that glinted in the moonlight, the crystal pendant she always wore, a gift from her grandmother. Some old protections still work, it seems. While Evangeline was distracted, I lunged forward, bringing the flashlight down on the back of her head with all my might. There was a sound like cracking ice, and the creature stumbled forward. Mia moved at the same moment, flinging something at Evangeline, a handful of small objects that sizzled when they hit her wet form. Salt, I realized. Mia had found salt in the abandoned store. Evangeline screamed, a sound that shook the entire building. Her body began to dissolve where the salt had touched, revealing glimpses of her true form beneath the human disguise, something ancient and aquatic and utterly alien. "The book!" Mia shouted over the creature's screams. "From the shrine. It said salt and fire would bind her." I understood immediately. We need to burn this place down. Evangeline was recovering, her form stabilizing as she backed away from us. "You cannot destroy me," she hissed. "I am eternal. I am the water." "Maybe," I said, "but water evaporates." I had a lighter in my pocket, part of the emergency kit I always carried. It was small, but it would be enough to start a fire in this old, dry wood. Mia seemed to read my thoughts. She moved to the opposite corner of the room, drawing Evangeline's attention. "Over here, you ancient bitch!" As the creature turned, I flicked the lighter and touched the flame to the nearest wall. The old, dry wood caught immediately, the fire spreading with surprising speed. Evangeline shrieked as she sensed what was happening. She lunged for me, but Mia was there, throwing the last of her salt directly into the creature's face. Evangeline recoiled, her form beginning to melt and distort. "We need to get out of here," I shouted as the fire spread across the ceiling. The smoke was already getting thick. "There!" Mia pointed to where the fire had burned through part of the wall, creating an opening large enough to squeeze through. It was a long drop to the ground, but better than burning or drowning. We made for the gap, but Evangeline wasn't finished. Though her form was melting, dissolving back into the water that was her true element, she still had enough substance to reach out and grab Mia's ankle. Mia fell hard, crying out as her head struck the floor. The creature began to pull her toward the rising water, her body leaving a wet trail on the floorboards. I grabbed Mia's wrists, pulling against Evangeline's grip. It was like a macabre tug-of-war, with my friend as the rope. The fire was spreading rapidly now, the heat intense against my back. "Let her go," I shouted, kicking at the elongated limb that held Mia's ankle. Evangeline's face appeared in the water, no longer even attempting to appear human. "If I perish here, I will not go alone." The building groaned as the fire weakened its structure. We were running out of time. With one final, desperate effort, I pulled Mia toward me, simultaneously stomping on Evangeline's arm with all my strength. There was a sound like breaking glass, and the limb shattered, dissolving back into water. Mia was free. I helped her to her feet and half-dragged her to the opening in the wall. "You first," I insisted, helping her climb through. She dropped to the ground below with a painful-sounding thud, but called up immediately. "I'm okay. Jump." I was about to follow when something wrapped around my waist. Not a hand this time, but a tendril of water that had risen from the flood and taken solid form. It yanked me backward, away from escape. "If I burn, you burn with me," Evangeline's voice hissed from the water. The fire had nearly encircled us now. The heat was unbearable, the smoke choking. The building shuddered again, more severely this time. It wouldn't stand much longer. I struggled against the watery grip, but it was like fighting against a riptide. It pulled me inexorably toward the center of the room, where the water was deepest and Evangeline's face floated just below the surface. "Back!" Mia screamed from outside. "Back!" I couldn't see the opening anymore through the smoke and flames. Even if I could break free, I wasn't sure I could find my way out. The tendril pulled me down to my knees, then onto my back, dragging me through the water toward Evangeline's waiting maw. As my head went under, I heard a new sound, breaking glass, and then a whoosh as something ignited. Through the water, I saw a bottle arcing through the air, trailing fire, a Molotov cocktail made from one of the old bottles in the store and whatever flammable liquid Mia had been able to find. It struck the water near me and exploded into flames. The surface of the water itself caught fire, burning with unnatural intensity. Evangeline's scream was like nothing I'd ever heard, the sound of something ancient and powerful facing true death for the first time. The tendril around my waist loosened as Evangeline's attention shifted to the existential threat of the burning water. I rolled away, coughing and gasping, and crawled toward where I thought the opening had been. The smoke was too thick to see anything now. My lungs burned and my eyes streamed tears. I was going to die here, I realized. At least Mia had escaped. At least Evangeline would die with me. Then hands grabbed me, human hands, warm and solid. Mia had climbed back in to find me. She guided me to the opening and helped push me through, then followed right behind. We landed in a heap on the ground as the store collapsed behind us, the roof caving in with a deafening crash. The entire structure was engulfed in flames now, burning far more intensely than a normal fire should. From within the inferno came one last, inhuman shriek, a sound of rage and disbelief, and finally, fear. Then silence, broken only by the roar of the flames. We dragged ourselves away from the burning building, collapsing at a safe distance. For a long time, we just lay there, coughing and gasping, unable to speak or even think clearly. Finally, Mia raised herself on one elbow. "Jen?" I shook my head, feeling tears track through the soot on my face. "I don't think so. If Evangeline's hold was broken, we would have seen her. I think she was already gone." Mia nodded, her own eyes shining with tears. "I was afraid of that." We watched as the abandoned settlement burned, the fire spreading from the store to the surrounding buildings. The flames were unnatural, burning blue and green in places. black smoke rose into the night sky, taking with it, I hoped, whatever remained of Evangeline Blackwell. Dawn found us still sitting there, watching the smoldering ruins. The forest around us seemed different somehow, lighter, less oppressive. The perpetual mist that had followed us was gone, and the sound of rushing water had faded to the natural babble of the distant creek. "We should try to find the road," Mia said eventually. "According to that map, it should be east of here." I nodded, too exhausted for words. We gathered what remained of our supplies and began walking east, supporting each other when our strength faltered. The forest no longer seemed to actively resist our passage. The trails stayed where they should, and the underbrush didn't grab at our clothes with unnatural persistence. After a few hours of difficult but straightforward hiking, we emerged onto a narrow dirt road. We followed it south, hoping it would eventually connect to a main road. Around midday, we heard the most beautiful sound imaginable, the rumble of an approaching vehicle. It was a Florida Forest Service truck, driven by a ranger who looked utterly shocked to find two battered, smoke-stained women in the middle of nowhere. He took us to the ranger station, where we were given food, water, and medical attention for our various cuts, burns, and bruises. We told a heavily edited version of our story, getting lost, finding the abandoned settlement, the accidental fire. We didn't mention Evangeline or what had happened to Jen. Who would believe us? Instead, we reported Jen as missing, triggering a search that I knew would never find her. That was 6 months ago. The official report states that Jennifer Carson was lost in the Apalachicola National Forest, presumed deceased. The abandoned settlement of Blackwell's Crossing was destroyed by a wildfire of unknown origin. The case is closed. Mia and I still talk weekly. We're the only ones who know the truth about what happened in those woods. Sometimes I think we should go back to make sure Evangeline is truly gone. Other times I wake up in the middle of the night, certain I can hear the sound of rushing water and distant whistling. I haven't been camping since. I doubt I ever will again. Some experiences change you forever, leave a mark that never truly fades. Some waters never dry completely. My name is Rebecca Thorne. This happened in October of 2024, and sometimes when it rains, I still hear whistling in the distance. My name is Elise Reynolds. This happened in July of 2024, during what the meteorologists were calling the hottest summer on record in southern Florida. I'm a research biologist specializing in invasive species, and I had received a grant to study the effect of climate change on the migration patterns of several non-native plants in the Fakahatchee Strand Preserve. My husband, Daniel, came along to help with the technical aspects, setting up monitoring equipment, managing our data collection systems, and keeping me company during what was supposed to be a week-long expedition into one of America's most unique ecosystems. We also brought our dog Scout, a 3-year-old German Shepherd mix who we'd rescued as a puppy. Daniel had trained him well, and Scout was both protection and companionship in what can be an intimidating wilderness. The Fakahatchee is often called the Amazon of North America, a fitting name for the largest strand swamp in the world. It's a place of stunning beauty, ancient cypress trees draped with air plants and orchids, their massive trunks rising from tea-colored water. But beauty and danger often go hand in hand in wild places. We had permits to venture beyond the boardwalks and maintained trails. Our research required accessing more remote areas where the invasive plants were establishing footholds. The park rangers had briefed us on safety protocols, watching for cottonmouths and alligators, avoiding the deep water holes, maintaining communication schedules. They'd warned us about the practical dangers of the swamp, but no one mentioned the other things that dwelled there. No one told us about Marjorie Blackwood. The first 2 days went according to schedule. We established our base camp on a dry hammock about 3 miles from the nearest trail. It was primitive but comfortable enough. A 4-person tent, our equipment organized under a tarp, and a small fire ring that complied with the special use permit we'd acquired. During the days, I collected samples and recorded observations while Daniel set up environmental sensors and plotted GPS coordinates. Scout patrolled the perimeter of our camp, occasionally pointing out wildlife or simply laying in patches of filtered sunlight that broke through the dense canopy. Looking back, I realized the strangeness began subtly on the third day. Scout started barking at empty patches of swamp. Not his usual alert bark at wildlife, but a low, uncertain growl directed at nothing we could see. Daniel dismissed it, probably just smelling a gator underwater, but I noticed how Scout's hackles would rise as he stared intently at specific sections of the swamp, areas that appeared no different than any other. That evening, we returned to our camp after a long day of field work to find things not quite right. I initially thought it was my imagination. The folding camp chairs positioned at slightly different angles, the order of our cooking supplies rearranged, one of my specimen bags moved from where I'd carefully placed it. Daniel suggested that perhaps Scout had nudged things around while we were gone, but the dog had been with us the entire day. Maybe it was the wind, Daniel offered, though there had been barely a breeze. I let it go. When you're in an unfamiliar environment, paranoia comes easily. But that night I woke to Scout's growling, a continuous threatening rumble from deep in his chest. He stood rigid at the tent opening, staring out into the darkness. "What is it, boy?" I whispered, not wanting to wake Daniel. Scout didn't acknowledge me. His eyes remained fixed on something outside our tent. I carefully unzipped the mesh just enough to peek out, expecting to see the reflective eyes of a curious raccoon or possum. Instead, there was only darkness and the ambient sounds of the swamp. Frogs, insects, the occasional splash of something entering or leaving the water. Scout continued to growl until I finally coaxed him back to his sleeping pad, but he remained tense, his eyes open and alert until dawn. The fourth day brought new concerns. Our GPS devices began showing inconsistent readings. Daniel's careful mapping of our research sites suddenly showed impossible patterns, locations jumping half a mile in impossible directions, creating a chaotic web across our digital map. "This doesn't make sense," Daniel muttered, recalibrating his equipment for the third time. "We're in an open area. There shouldn't be this kind of signal interference." While Daniel worked on the equipment, I decided to venture a short distance to examine a promising stand of Cyperaceae I'd noticed the previous day. Scout came with me, trotting ahead but staying within sight as trained. That's when we first encountered her. She appeared so suddenly and silently that I gasped in surprise. One moment the path ahead was empty, and the next she stood there, a woman who seemed both old and ageless simultaneously. Her white hair hung in long, unkempt strands around a face that was deeply lined yet somehow smooth in places, as if time had touched her inconsistently. She wore practical outdoor clothing that could have been purchased at any outfitter, but something about the way she wore them suggested unfamiliarity, as if modern garments were foreign to her. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice surprisingly melodic. "Not without knowing the proper ways." Scout, normally protective and suspicious of strangers, whined softly and wagged his tail. "I'm sorry," I said, recovering from my surprise. "We have research permits. I'm Dr. Elise Reynolds, studying invasive plant species." A smile creased her face. "I'm not concerned with human permissions. Dear, I'm talking about the old courtesies. The swamp doesn't take kindly to those who don't observe them." I wasn't sure how to respond to that. Growing up in rural Pennsylvania, I'd encountered my share of locals with superstitions about the land, but something about this woman's certainty unsettled me. "I'm Marjorie," she continued when I didn't reply. "Marjorie Blackwood. I've lived in this strand for quite some time." "That's not possible," I said before I could stop myself. "This is protected land. There are no private residences within the preserve." She laughed, a sound like water trickling over stones. "Official maps don't show every dwelling, Dr. Reynolds. Some places prefer to remain hidden." I was about to argue further when Scout suddenly pressed against my leg, his usual signal that he was uncomfortable. Despite his earlier friendliness, something had changed his mind about our visitor. "Your companion has good instincts," Marjorie said, nodding towards Scout. "But he needn't worry. I mean, no harm. In fact, I may be able to help with your research. I know every plant in this swamp, native or newcomer." The scientist in me was immediately interested, despite my unease. Local knowledge could be invaluable, especially in an ecosystem as complex as the Fakahachi. "My cabin is just a quarter-mile from here," she continued. "I have some reference materials that might interest you, and perhaps your husband would appreciate some of my herbal tea. It's excellent for relieving the fatigue of fieldwork." I felt a chill run through me. "I don't believe I mentioned my husband." Her smile didn't waver. "Didn't you? Well, I must have assumed. Most researchers don't come alone, and I noticed 2 sleeping bags in your camp." The implication that she'd been observing our camp was alarming, but before I could respond, Daniel's voice called from behind me. "Elise, everything okay?" Daniel appeared through the trees, looking relieved to have found me but immediately curious about Marjorie. "Just meeting a local," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. "This is Marjorie Blackwood. She says she lives nearby." Daniel looked confused. "In the preserve? I thought—" "My family was here long before this became government land," Marjorie interrupted smoothly. "I was just inviting your wife to visit my cabin. I have resources that might help with her research." Daniel looked as skeptical as I felt, but his natural politeness won out. "That's very kind, but we should probably stick to our research schedule." "Of course," Marjorie said, "but perhaps you'll change your mind. The swamp can be unpredictable. If you need assistance, follow the stands of ghost orchids. They'll lead you to my home." She pointed to a delicate white flower blooming on a nearby tree, its petals translucent in the filtered sunlight. Before either of us could reply, she turned and walked away, disappearing between the cypress trees with surprising speed for someone who appeared to be in her 70s. "What the hell was that about?" Daniel asked once she was gone. "I have no idea. She just appeared on the trail, said she's lived here for a long time." "That's impossible," Daniel said, echoing my earlier thought. "The rangers would know if someone was living illegally in the preserve." "Unless she's just messing with us," I suggested. "Maybe she's a local who likes to spook researchers and tourists." Daniel nodded, seemingly satisfied with this explanation. "Well, we're not going anywhere near her cabin, if it even exists. I don't trust anyone who admits to spying on our camp." We returned to our work, but the encounter with Marjorie lingered in my mind throughout the day. Scout seemed distracted too, constantly looking back in the direction she had gone. By evening, we were both exhausted and ready to put the strange meeting behind us. That night, the temperature dropped unexpectedly. What had been sweltering heat became an unseasonable chill that penetrated our sleeping bags. Around midnight, I woke to the sound of our campfire crackling loudly, which was impossible as we'd extinguished it hours earlier. I unzipped the tent to find the fire blazing higher than we'd ever built it, flames dancing in unnatural colors, deep purples and blues mixed with the normal orange. Scout stood rigidly by the fire, staring into its depths as if mesmerized. "Scout, come here," I called softly, not wanting to wake Daniel. The dog didn't move. The firelight reflected in his eyes, giving them an eerie glow. "Scout," I said more firmly, but he remained transfixed. I stepped out of the tent and approached him cautiously. When I touched his back, he finally turned to look at me, but something was wrong. His eyes seemed empty, unfocused. He whined softly, a sound so plaintive it made my heart ache. The fire suddenly dimmed, returning to normal color and intensity. Scout shook himself as if waking from a trance and trotted back to the tent, seemingly normal again. I checked the fire carefully. It was burning at a reasonable level, contained within our fire ring. Had I dreamed the whole thing? The swamp's humidity could cause wood to pop and spark in unusual ways, and the strange colors could have been my mind playing tricks in the darkness. I returned to our tent, but sleep eluded me for the rest of the night. Daniel slept soundly beside me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us from just beyond the circle of light cast by our lantern. The next morning, Daniel complained of fatigue despite having slept through the night. "I feel like I didn't sleep at all," he said, rubbing his eyes, "and I'm so thirsty." He drained his water bottle in one long gulp, then reached for mine. I noticed his hands trembling slightly. "Maybe we should take it easy today," I suggested. "You might be coming down with something." He shook his head stubbornly. "We've only got a few days left here. We need to stick to the schedule." While preparing the breakfast, I discovered that several of our food items had spoiled overnight. Fruits turned to mush, energy bars covered in mold, trail mix infested with insects. It was impossible. We'd checked everything the night before. Daniel blamed the heat and humidity, but I wasn't convinced. Everything had been properly sealed and stored. I remembered Marjorie's words. "The swamp doesn't take kindly to those who don't observe the old courtesies." Despite my concerns, we proceeded with our research plan for the day. Daniel's condition deteriorated as the hours passed. His movements became sluggish, his focus scattered. By mid-afternoon, he was so weak he had to rest every few minutes. "I think we need to cut this trip short," I said as he sat heavily on a fallen log. "You need to see a doctor." "No," he insisted. "I'll be fine. Just need to rest a bit." While Daniel rested, I took Scout to collect a few final samples. We'd ventured about 50 yards from Daniel when Scout suddenly raised his head, ears alert. Before I could grab his leash, he bolted into the trees. To the "Scout!" I called, running after him. "Scout, come back!" I chased him through the underbrush, branches whipping at my face and arms. Ahead, I caught glimpses of his tail as he followed some trail invisible to me. When I finally broke through into a small clearing, I stopped abruptly. In the center stood a cabin, weathered cypress planks darkened by age and humidity. Smoke curled from a stone chimney, and herbs hung drying from the eaves. Scout sat at the front door, tail wagging, as if he'd found exactly what he was looking for. The door opened, and Marjorie Blackwood stepped out. "I've been expecting you," she said with a smile, "though I thought both of you would come." "My husband isn't feeling well," I replied cautiously. "Yes, I know." Something in her tone made my skin crawl. "That's why you need my help. Come inside." Against my better judgment, I followed her into the cabin. The interior was a single room, filled with an astonishing array of plant specimens, some dried and hanging from the ceiling, others growing in pots or preserved in clear liquid in glass jars. A fire burned in the hearth despite the day's warmth, and the air was thick with the scent of herbs I couldn't identify. Scout entered behind me, moving to curl up by the fire as if he'd done so many times before. "What's wrong with Daniel?" I asked directly. Marjorie busied herself with a kettle hanging over the fire. "The swamp is taking from him. It does that when the proper rituals aren't observed." "That's ridiculous," I said. "He probably has heat exhaustion or a virus." "Believe what you will," she replied calmly. "But I can help him. This tea will restore his strength." She poured a steaming liquid into a clay mug. It smelled surprisingly pleasant, like cinnamon and something darker, earthier. "Why would you help us? You don't even know us." Her eyes met mine, and for a moment they seemed to shift color, from brown to a pale, unnatural green. "I don't get many visitors," she said, "and I've grown fond of your companion." She nodded towards Scout, who watched her with that same unsettling, empty gaze I'd noticed the night before. I took the mug, but had no intention of giving an unknown substance to my sick husband. "Thank you. I should get back to Daniel now." "Of course," she smiled. "But remember, Dr. Reynolds, the tea must be consumed while it's still warm. Its properties fade quickly." I nodded and turned to leave. "Scout, come." The dog didn't move. "Scout," I repeated firmly. Marjorie made a small gesture with her hand. "Go on, boy. Stay with your people. For now." Scout stood and followed me out, but he kept looking back at the cabin. As we walked away, I could feel Marjorie watching us. I waited until we were out of sight before emptying the tea onto the ground. The soil where it spilled immediately turned black, as if burned. When we returned to Daniel, his condition had worsened. His skin was pale and clammy, dark circles forming under his eyes. He could barely stand without my help. "We're leaving," I told him. "Now. I'll call the ranger station for assistance." But our satellite phone wouldn't connect, showing full signal but failing to complete any call. Our backup radio produced only static. "We need to get back to the trailhead ourselves," I said, trying to keep the rising panic out of my voice. "Can you walk, if I help you?" Daniel nodded weakly. I quickly packed our essential gear, leaving the rest to retrieve later. With Daniel leaning heavily on me and Scout leading the way, we began the long trek back toward civilization. We'd only covered about half a mile when darkness began to fall with unnatural speed. The swamp transformed around us, familiar landmarks suddenly unrecognizable, trails disappearing into tangles of vegetation that I was certain hadn't been there before. "We're going in circles," Daniel murmured, his voice faint. He was right. Despite following our GPS coordinates, we kept finding ourselves back near the same distinctive cypress tree. Fear turned to certainty. Something was manipulating our path, keeping us trapped. As full darkness descended, I made a difficult decision. We couldn't continue wandering blindly. We needed to make camp and try again in daylight. I found a relatively dry spot and helped Daniel lie down on our emergency blanket. His breathing had become shallow, his skin burning with fever. Scout paced restlessly around our makeshift camp, whimpering occasionally. I tried to comfort him, but he shied away from my touch. "What's wrong with him?" Daniel asked weakly. "I don't know. He's been acting strange ever since." I hesitated. "Since what?" I hadn't told Daniel about finding Marjorie's cabin. I didn't want to worry him, and part of me had hoped to dismiss the entire incident as stress-induced imagination. But now, with Daniel seriously ill and us seemingly trapped in the swamp, I couldn't hide it anymore. I told him everything, about following Scout to the cabin, about Marjorie's offer of tea, about the way the soil had blackened when I poured it out. "You think she did something to me?" Daniel asked, his scientific mind still fighting against the impossible reality we were facing. I struggled to articulate the growing certainty. "I think she's somehow draining your energy, and I think she's doing something to Scout too." As if confirming my fears, Scout suddenly stood alert, looking into the darkness. Without warning, he bolted away from our camp. "Scout," I called, jumping to my feet. "Stay with Daniel," I said. "I have to find him." "No," Daniel grasped my hand weakly. "Don't leave. That's what she wants." But I couldn't abandon Scout. "I'll be right back," I promised. "Just stay awake." I grabbed my flashlight and plunged into the darkness after Scout. The beam cut through the mist that had begun to rise from the swamp floor, creating ghostly shapes that seemed to reach toward me. I called Scout's name repeatedly, following the sound of breaking branches. The chase led me unerringly back to Marjorie's cabin. This time, all pretense of normalcy was gone. The structure seemed alive, wooden planks pulsing like a heartbeat, the herbs hanging from the eaves swaying without wind. Scout sat in front of the door, but when he turned at my approach, I nearly screamed. His eyes glowed with an unnatural green light, identical to the shifting color I'd seen in Marjorie's eyes. When he growled, his teeth seemed too sharp, too numerous. "What have you done to him?" I demanded, knowing Marjorie could hear me even though she wasn't visible. The door creaked open. Scout entered without hesitation. Fear for my dog overcame my terror of what awaited inside. I followed, stepping into a scene from a nightmare. The cabin's interior had changed, expanded impossibly. The single room now a vast space filled with glowing symbols carved into the walls and floor. The fire in the hearth burned that same unnatural blue-purple I'd seen at our camp, and suspended above it in a crude cage was something that turned my blood to ice. A doll, made from what appeared to be Scout's fur, twined around a small stick figure. Marjorie stood before the fire, no longer maintaining her appearance of normal elderly woman. Her true form was revealed, skin like ancient bark, fingers too long and jointed in too many places, that white hair now moving on its own like pale tentacles. Scout sat beside her, his posture stiff and unnatural. "You should have accepted my help when offered," Marjorie said, her voice now a harsh rasp. "The tea would have made your husband's passing painless." "What are you?" I managed to ask. "I've been called many things over the centuries. Witch, hag, monster." She smiled, revealing teeth filed to points. "I prefer to think of myself as a necessary balance. The swamp gives life, and I take it when needed." "Why us? Why, Daniel?" "Your husband's life force is strong. It will sustain me for many seasons." She stroked Scout's head possessively. "And I've always wanted a companion. Dogs are loyal, easily bound. Unlike humans, they don't fight the possession." With growing horror, I realized what she meant. She wasn't just controlling Scout, she was gradually transferring her consciousness into him, creating a new vessel for herself when her current body failed. "Let them go," I demanded, trying to sound braver than I felt. "We'll leave and never return." Marjorie laughed. "Too late for that, Dr. Reynolds. The binding has begun. By dawn, your husband's life will be mine, and your loyal Scout will host my spirit for the next decade or two. As for you," she examined me critically, "you're too full of disbelief, too resistant. You'd make a poor vessel, but your fear will flavor the ritual nicely." As she spoke, Scout stood and began moving toward me, his movements jerky and wrong, as if someone else was pulling his strings. His lips pulled back in a snarl that my gentle dog had never made before. "Scout, no," I pleaded. "It's me." For just a moment, I thought I saw recognition flicker in his eyes, but it quickly disappeared, replaced by that eerie green glow. I backed toward the door, but it slammed shut on its own. I was trapped with a powerful witch and my own beloved dog who was now her weapon against me. My mind raced, searching for anything that might help. As a biologist, I knew plants, their properties, their potential uses. My gaze darted around the cabin, taking inventory of the specimens hanging from the ceiling and lining the shelves. Many were familiar Florida species, but others I'd never seen before, at least not in their natural state. One in particular caught my attention, a dark purple-black fungus preserved in a jar, labeled in faded handwriting, "Death Cap of the Glade." I recognized it from my mycology studies, an extremely toxic fungus related to common death caps but specific to southern swamplands. Even handling it required caution. Marjorie noticed my interest. "Ah, you have a botanist's eye. Yes, that's one of my more precious specimens. A single grain can stop a heart." While she spoke, I slowly reached into my pocket where I kept a small specimen collection kit. Forceps, vials, gloves, standard equipment for a field biologist. "You're not a simple swamp witch, are you?" I asked, trying to keep her attention on my face rather than my hands. "The locals would have legends about you." She preened at this, her vanity evident. "I've had many names through many lifetimes. The Seminole called me she who dwells in roots. The Spanish thought me a saint at first, then a demon. I've been here since before this land had a name." As she spoke, Scout continued his approach, moving in an arc to cut off my escape. I needed to act quickly. "You must get lonely," I said. "Is that why you're taking Scout? For companionship?" "Vessels wear out," she replied matter-of-factly. "Your dog has a good decade ahead of him. Strong body, sharp mind. The perfect host until I find something better." In one swift motion, I pulled on a latex glove, grabbed the forceps from my pocket, and reached for the jar containing the death cap fungus. The lid was sealed with wax, but the ancient container cracked easily when I smashed it against the edge of a table. Marjorie screamed in rage, a sound no human throat could produce. Scout lunged at me, but years of handling unpredictable animals in the field had given me quick reflexes. I dodged his attack and managed to grasp a piece of the fungus with my forceps. "Stop!" Marjorie commanded, making a complex gesture with her elongated fingers. The air itself seemed to solidify around me, making movement difficult. "Do you think I haven't protected myself against my own poisons?" She was right. Trying to poison her directly would be futile. But that wasn't my plan. With every ounce of strength I had, I broke free of the invisible restraint just enough to reach the fire. The cage hanging above it contained the fur doll, the sympathetic link between Marjorie and Scout. In one desperate move, I tossed the deathcap fungus into the flames beneath it. The fungus ignited with a flash of sickly green. Toxic spores billowed upward, engulfing the fur doll. Marjorie shrieked, a sound of genuine fear. She lunged toward the fire but hesitated, unwilling to expose herself to the toxic cloud. Scout collapsed to the floor, his body convulsing. I wanted desperately to go to him, but I knew the battle wasn't over. Marjorie turned her fury toward me, her form shifting and growing, darkening the room with her rage. "Foolish woman, I've lived 1,000 of your lifetimes. I cannot be destroyed by mere poison." "I don't need to destroy you," I replied, backing toward the door. "I just need to break your connection to Scout and get my husband far away from you." I grabbed a burning brand from the edge of the hearth, swinging it before me to keep her at bay. The toxic smoke continued to fill the cabin, making breathing difficult. Marjorie began chanting in a language I didn't recognize, her hair tentacles writhing wildly. Objects around the cabin began to vibrate and rise into the air. Jars, tools, dried plants, all spinning in a vortex around her. I reached Scout's limp form and dragged him toward the door with my free hand, still keeping the burning brand between us and Marjorie. The door remained sealed by her magic, but the walls of the cabin had begun to warp and crack as her rage affected the very structure of her home. In desperation, I thrust the burning brand against the dry cypress wall. It caught immediately, flames racing up toward the roof. Marjorie's chant faltered as she realized what I'd done. Fire reflected in her inhuman eyes. "This place has stood for 3 centuries," she hissed. "You think mere flames will destroy it?" "No," I admitted, "but they'll distract you." With all my strength, I kicked at a section of wall where the wood had rotted near the ground. Once, twice, on the third kick, it splintered, creating an opening just large enough to drag Scout through. I pulled him out into the night air, gulping breath that wasn't filled with toxic spores. Behind me, Marjorie's screams mingled with the crackling of flames. The cabin was now fully engulfed, centuries-old wood feeding a blaze that lit up the swamp like daylight. Through the broken wall, I could see her silhouette moving frantically among the flames, trying to save her specimens, her tools, the artifacts of her long existence. Scout stirred in my arms, whimpering softly. His eyes, when they opened, were his own again. Warm brown, confused, but free of that eerie green glow. "It's okay, boy," I murmured, checking him quickly for injuries. "We're getting out of here." With Scout leaning heavily against my leg, we staggered away from the burning cabin. I had no idea if fire could truly destroy a being like Marjorie, but I hoped it would at least weaken her, buy us time to escape with Daniel. Finding our way back to Daniel was surprisingly easy now. It was as if the swamp itself had stopped actively working against us. We found him exactly where I'd left him, unconscious but still breathing. "Daniel," I called, shaking him gently. "Daniel, wake up. We have to go." His eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first. "Elise? What happened?" "No time to explain. Can you stand?" With my help, he managed to get to his feet, though he swayed dangerously. Scout pressed against his other side, helping stabilize him. In the distance behind us, the orange glow of the burning cabin lit up the mist, creating an apocalyptic scene. "What is that?" Daniel asked weakly. "Our only chance," I replied. "We need to move, now." Supporting Daniel between us, Scout and I began the journey out of the swamp. Every step was agony. Daniel could barely walk, Scout was still recovering from Marjorie's possession, and I was running on pure adrenaline. But the alternative was staying in Marjorie's domain, and that wasn't an option. We hadn't gone far when an unearthly wail rose behind us, a sound of rage and loss that made the hair on my neck stand on end. Marjorie had survived the fire. "She's coming," I gasped, trying to move faster. "Who?" Daniel asked, still confused. "I'll explain later. Just move." We pushed on through the darkness, following our GPS as best we could. The device still showed erratic readings, but the general direction seemed accurate. Behind us, sounds of pursuit grew closer, branches breaking, water splashing, and occasionally that terrible wail, closer each time. Scout suddenly stopped, ears alert. He turned to face the way we'd come, a low growl building in his chest. I expected to see Marjorie burst through the trees at any moment, but instead, the night went eerily silent. Even the normal sounds of the swamp, frogs, insects, night birds, fell quiet. In that silence, I heard a whispered voice that seemed to come from the trees themselves. "I will find you again, Elise Reynolds. You and your husband and your loyal dog. No one steals from me and lives to tell of it." The voice faded, replaced gradually by the normal nocturnal sounds of the swamp. Scout relaxed slightly, looking up at me for guidance. "Is she gone?" Daniel asked, more lucid now than he had been in hours. "For now," I replied, "but we still need to get out of here." We continued our journey through the night, each step taking us closer to safety. By dawn, Daniel was able to walk more steadily, though he remained pale and weak. As sunlight filtered through the canopy, we finally reached the main trail that would lead us back to the ranger station. 2 park rangers found us about a mile from the station. Apparently, they'd been organizing a search party when our satellite transmitter had stopped sending its regular ping. They were shocked at our condition. Daniel dehydrated and weak, Scout limping and subdued, me covered in scratches and burns. The official report listed our experience as a case of getting lost, combined with Daniel suffering from a severe case of heat exhaustion and possible exposure to a toxic plant. The fire in the swamp was attributed to lightning, a common occurrence in Florida summers. No one mentioned Marjorie Blackwood or her impossible cabin. The Rangers had no record of anyone living within the preserve boundaries, legally or otherwise. Daniel recovered slowly in the hospital. Blood tests showed unusual toxins that the doctors couldn't identify, but they eventually cleared his system. Scout regained his normal personality, though he never again showed the same enthusiasm for hiking or outdoor adventures. As for me, I abandoned my research at the Fakahatchee. Some places are better left unexplored, some knowledge better left undiscovered. I transferred my grant to study invasive species in the significantly less remote environment of the University of Miami's controlled greenhouse facilities. We never spoke publicly about what really happened. Who would believe us? But sometimes, when the humidity rises and summer thunderstorms roll across southern Florida, I catch Daniel staring out at the rain with vacant eyes, as if seeing something beyond the water running down the glass. In those moments, I know he's back in the swamp, feeling his life force draining away. Scout never fully recovered. The veterinarians couldn't find anything physically wrong with him, but he developed strange behaviors, staring fixedly at dark corners, growling at shadows, refusing to be left alone after sunset. Sometimes I catch him watching me with an intensity that makes my blood run cold, and I have to remind myself that Marjorie's hold on him was broken. Wasn't it? The most disturbing development came 3 months after our escape. A letter arrived at our home. No return address, no postmark, just our names written in a spidery hand on aged paper that smelled faintly of swamp water and herbs. Inside was a single pressed flower, a ghost orchid, perfectly preserved, and 5 words written in what appeared to be darkened blood. "I keep my promises, Dr. Reynolds." I burned the letter and the flower, but the fear remains. I find myself studying the faces of elderly women in grocery stores, at academic conferences, even passing by our house. Any could be her. Every white-haired woman makes my heart race until I confirm she has normal eyes, normal hands, a normal voice. Daniel thinks we should move across the country, start fresh somewhere far from Florida. But I know better. Distance won't save us. Marjorie Blackwood found her way into the Fakahatchee long before it became a preserve, carved out her own realm within it, and sustained herself for centuries by preying on those who ventured too deep. My only hope is that her powers are tied to that swamp, that the destruction of her cabin weakened her enough that she cannot reach us here in the city, but I don't truly believe that. Some nights, I wake to find Scout standing rigid by our bedroom window, staring out into the darkness, a low growl building in his throat, and though I strain my eyes, I can never quite see what he's watching. But I know she's out there, waiting, gathering her strength, rebuilding. I know because sometimes, when I dream, I'm back in that cabin, surrounded by flames, but instead of escaping, I'm trapped. And Marjorie stands before me, untouched by the fire, holding out a steaming cup of tea. "Drink," she says in those dreams, her eyes shifting from brown to that unnatural green. "The transition will be easier if you don't fight it." And the worst part, the thing that wakes me screaming in the night, is that sometimes, in the dream, I reach for the cup. Sometimes, I drink. My name is Emma Whitaker. I'm 34 years old, and this happened in October of 2024. I've spent the last 8 months trying to convince myself that what occurred in Ocala National Forest was nothing more than a psychotic break, a manifestation of stress, dehydration, and my already fragile mental state following my divorce. But the nightmares won't stop, and sometimes, when I'm alone in my apartment at night, I swear I can hear her whispering. "It'll be fun," Tessa had insisted, her voice bright with that infectious enthusiasm I'd always both envied and found slightly exhausting. 3 days of actual wilderness, Emma. No Zoom meetings, no Excel spreadsheets, no finalizing divorce paperwork, just trees, campfires, and actual human connection. I should have said no. Any reasonable person with my limited outdoor experience would have declined. But that was exactly why I said yes. I was tired of being reasonable Emma, predictable Emma, anxious Emma who needed everything color-coded and planned to the minute. My therapist had been encouraging me to embrace impulsivity as part of my healing process. So when my college roommate turned lifelong friend suggested this camping trip, I reluctantly agreed. "Ryan knows these trails like the back of his hand," Tessa continued, referencing her boyfriend of 6 months, a man I'd met exactly twice and felt instantly uneasy around despite his perfect smile and outdoor magazine good looks. "He's been hiking through Ocala since he was a kid. We'll be totally safe." Safety wasn't my primary concern. I was more worried about being the third wheel on what was essentially a romantic getaway. But Tessa insisted she wanted girl time too, and Ryan had apparently invited somebody who ended up canceling last minute. So there I was, on a Friday morning in October, squeezing an absurd amount of bug spray into my brand new backpack that still had price tags hanging from the straps. The drive from Tampa took us just over 2 hours. I spent most of it in the back seat of Ryan's immaculately maintained Jeep Wrangler, listening to him explain the geological formations and ecological specifics of the Ocala National Forest to a clearly adoring Tessa. I tried not to roll my eyes too obviously when he mansplained the difference between a swamp and a marsh to me, an environmental accountant who had literally worked on wetland conservation projects. "We're heading to a spot near Alexander Springs," Ryan explained as we turned onto a Forest Service road that looked considerably less maintained than the main highway. "There are some amazing trails that connect over to Juniper Springs that most tourists never see." "Are we camping at a designated campground?" I asked, scrolling through the forest's official website on my phone while I still had service. Ryan's eyes met mine in the rearview mirror, a hint of condescension in his smile. "Not exactly. I know a few primitive spots that aren't on any official maps. much more authentic experience. My anxiety immediately spiked. Is that legal? Tessa turned in her seat, brown curls bouncing as she gave me a placating smile. It's fine, Em. Ryan's family has been camping here for generations. He knows all the rangers. I didn't argue, but I did send my location to my sister with a brief text explaining where I was going and when I'd be back. Sunday afternoon, presumably. My phone showed only 1 bar of service now, and as we ventured deeper into the forest, even that disappeared. The forest was admittedly beautiful. Ancient live oaks draped with Spanish moss, towering longleaf pines, and occasional glimpses of crystal-clear springs through the dense vegetation. In different circumstances, I might have appreciated the scenic drive more, but something about the way the trees seemed to close in behind us, the way each turn looked identical to the last, set me on edge. After an hour on increasingly narrow dirt roads, Ryan finally pulled into a small clearing. "Home sweet home for the next few days," he announced, killing the engine. I stepped out of the Jeep, stretching my legs while surveying our surroundings. The clearing was about 30 feet in diameter, ringed by dense pine and oak trees. A faint trail disappeared into the woods on the far side. The air felt heavy with humidity, and the chirping of insects created a constant background symphony. "How far are we from the springs?" I asked, already feeling sweat beading at my hairline in the late morning heat. "Alexander Springs is about 4 miles that way." Ryan pointed vaguely northeast. "But there's a smaller, unmarked spring about a mile south that's much more pristine. We'll hike there tomorrow." We spent the next hour setting up camp. Ryan had brought 2 tents, a larger one for him and Tessa and a smaller one for me. I was silently grateful for the privacy, even if it meant I'd be sleeping alone in the woods. Ryan built a fire pit with stones while Tessa and I unpacked the food supplies. "Did you hear that?" I asked suddenly, freezing in place with a can of beans in my hand. Tessa looked up from the cooler. "Hear what?" "I thought I heard someone whispering." Ryan chuckled as he arranged kindling. "Probably just the wind in the pines. These forests talk if you listen closely enough." I nodded, but I wasn't convinced. The sound had been distinctly human, a woman's voice, soft but urgent, though I couldn't make out any words. I shook it off as nerves. By early afternoon, our camp was established, and Ryan suggested we take a short hike to get our bearings before dinner. We filled water bottles, applied more bug spray, and set off down the narrow trail leading south. The forest seemed to swallow us immediately. The trail was barely visible in places, marked occasionally by small cairns of stacked stones. I nearly tripped several times over exposed roots and fallen branches, while Ryan moved ahead with the confidence of someone who'd walked this path 100 times. "Have you been to this specific spot before?" I asked him, catching up during a brief rest. "Yeah, many times," he replied, taking a long swig from his water bottle. "My grandfather used to bring me here. He knew all the secret places in Ocala." "Your family's from this area?" Something flickered across his face. Annoyance, perhaps? "My grandfather moved around a lot, but he spent a lot of time in these woods. Said they held power if you knew where to look." Before I could ask what he meant, Tessa called out from a few yards ahead. "Guys, check this out." We joined her at what appeared to be an ancient stone marker, about 3 feet tall, partially covered in moss and lichen. Strange symbols were carved into its surface, curves and lines that looked vaguely like letters but from no alphabet I recognized. "Weird," Tessa said, reaching out to touch the weathered stone. "Is this some kind of Native American thing?" Ryan pulled her hand back abruptly. "Don't touch it," he snapped, then immediately softened his tone. "Sorry, it's just, these markers are very old. Best to respect them." "What are they?" I asked. "Boundary stones," he replied after a pause. "From the old settlements. There are a few scattered throughout the forest." I frowned, trying to recall my Florida history. I didn't think there were many European settlements this deep in the Ocala forest historically. "Most people don't know about them," Ryan said dismissively. "Come on, we should head back before it gets dark." As we turned to leave, I cast one last glance at the stone marker. For a brief, unsettling moment, I could have sworn the symbols shifted under my gaze, rearranging themselves. I blinked, and they were static once more. The walk back to camp was tense and silent. The forest seemed darker, the spaces between trees deeper than they had been on our way out. Twice I thought I heard that whispering again. A woman's voice, urgent but unintelligible. Neither Tessa nor Ryan appeared to notice. That night, after a dinner of hot dogs roasted over the fire, we sat passing a flask of whiskey and exchanging ghost stories. Ryan seemed to know an unsettling number of local legends. "They say there's a woman who wanders these woods," he said, his face eerie in the firelight. "They call her the Whispering Woman. Legend has it she was a witch named Meredith Blackwood who lived alone in a cabin near what's now Alexander Springs back in the 1800s. Tessa leaned forward eagerly. "What happened to her?" "The locals became suspicious when children started disappearing. They formed a mob, dragged her from her home, and tried to burn her at the stake." Ryan took another swig of whiskey. "But the flames wouldn't take her, so they weighted her body with stones and threw her into the deepest part of the springs." "That's horrible," I murmured. "The legend says she didn't die," Ryan continued, his voice dropping lower. "The water preserved her, changed her. Now she wanders the forest, appearing as a beautiful woman to lure hikers off the trails. Those who follow her are never seen again." A chill ran down my spine despite the fire's warmth. "Nice campfire story," I said, trying to keep my tone light. Ryan's eyes met mine across the flames. "It's just a story," he agreed, but something in his expression suggested he believed otherwise. That night, I lay awake in my tent long after Tessa and Ryan had retired to theirs. The forest was never truly silent. Crickets chirped, leaves rustled, and occasionally something larger crashed through the underbrush in the distance. But beneath all those familiar sounds, I swore I could hear a woman whispering. The words were just beyond comprehension, like a radio station almost but not quite in range. I must have eventually fallen asleep, because I woke suddenly to the sound of my tent zipper opening. I shot upright, heart pounding, as a beam of flashlight momentarily blinded me. "Sorry," Tessa whispered, slipping inside. "Can I come in? I need to talk." "What time is it?" I mumbled, fumbling for my phone. The screen showed 3:17 a.m. and no service. Tessa sat cross-legged at the foot of my sleeping bag, her flashlight pointed downward to create a small circle of light between us. Her curls were wild around her face and she looked uncharacteristically serious. "Do you think Ryan's acting weird?" she asked without preamble. I hesitated. "I barely know him, Tess. What do you mean by weird?" She bit her lip. "He keeps getting up in the middle of the night, wandering off into the woods. And earlier, when we found that stone thing, I've never seen him snap at me like that." "Maybe he's just protective of historical artifacts," I suggested, though I didn't believe it. "It's not just that. Last week I found this old book in his apartment. Handwritten, super old-looking with those same symbols we saw on the stone. When I asked about it, he practically ripped it out of my hands." I sat up straighter. "Did he explain what it was?" "He said it was his grandfather's journal. But why would his grandfather be writing in some made-up language?" She hugged her knees to her chest. "And why did he really bring us out here? To this specific spot? He told me his buddy was coming too, but then suddenly he canceled. I'm starting to think there never was a friend." Before I could respond, a twig snapped loudly outside the tent. Tessa's flashlight beam swung wildly as we both jumped. "Tessa?" Ryan's voice called. "You in there?" Tessa and I exchanged a look of panic before she called back. "Yeah, just girl talk. I'll be right back." "It's late," Ryan replied, his tone strangely flat. "Come back to bed." "Be right there," Tessa replied. She turned to me, whispering urgently, "We should leave tomorrow. Make up some excuse." I nodded. "First thing in the morning." After Tessa left, I lay back down but couldn't sleep. The whispering seemed louder now, coming from all directions at once, and underneath it, I could swear I heard a woman weeping. Morning brought temporary relief. Sunshine filtered through the trees, birds sang, and the oppressive feeling of the night seemed to recede. I emerged from my tent to find Ryan already up, boiling water on a small camp stove. "Morning," he greeted me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Sleep well?" "Not really," I admitted. "Too many strange noises." "You get used to it." He handed me a mug of instant coffee. "Where's Tessa?" "Still sleeping?" I gestured toward their tent, which remained zipped shut. Ryan frowned. "She's not in there. I assumed she was with you." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean she's not in there? She went back to your tent around 3:30 this morning." Ryan shook his head slowly. "No, she didn't. I woke up alone about an hour ago." We called her name, checked the area around camp, even looked in both tents again as if she might magically appear. Her sleeping bag was empty. Her hiking boots were still neatly placed outside their tent. Her phone lay charging on a portable battery pack. "She wouldn't just wander off without her shoes," I said, panic rising in my throat. Ryan's face had gone pale. "We need to find her. Now." We spent the next hour searching the immediate vicinity of our camp, calling Tessa's name until our voices grew hoarse. There was no sign of her, no footprints, no broken branches, no response to our increasingly desperate shouts. "This doesn't make sense," I said, returning to camp after checking the trail we'd hiked the previous day. "People don't just vanish." Ryan was frantically checking his phone. "No service. We need to hike out, get help." "What direction is the main road?" He pointed vaguely. "That way, maybe 5 miles." "Maybe?" I stared at him. "I thought you knew these woods." "I do, but—" He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "Everything looks different today. The landmarks aren't where they should be." An icy feeling crept up my spine. "What do you mean, not where they should be?" Instead of answering, Ryan pulled out a paper map from his backpack. Not a standard Forest Service map, but what appeared to be a hand-drawn one, covered in those same strange symbols we'd seen on the stone marker. "What is that?" I demanded. "It's nothing. A family heirloom." He quickly folded it away, but not before I caught a glimpse of what looked like a rough drawing of a woman's face in one corner, her mouth open as if in mid-whisper. "Ryan, what the hell is going on? What aren't you telling me?" He avoided my eyes. "We need to find Tessa. That's all that matters right now." We packed emergency supplies and set off in the direction Ryan claimed would lead to the road. The forest seemed denser than the day before, the trail less defined. Several times Ryan paused, consulting his strange map with increasing agitation. "We should have hit the service road by now," he muttered after we'd been hiking for what felt like hours. The sun had risen high overhead, beating down through gaps in the canopy. I checked my phone again, still no service, and the GPS showed us in the middle of nowhere, the blue dot pulsing in an unmarked green expanse. "Let me see that map," I demanded. Ryan hesitated, then reluctantly handed it over. The paper felt strange between my fingers. Too thick, almost leathery. The markings were definitely not in any language I recognized, but there was something almost familiar about them, as if I'd seen them in a dream. The drawing of the woman's face seemed to stare back at me. Her eyes, two dark hollows that appeared to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. "Where did you really get this?" I asked quietly. Ryan snatched it back. "My grandfather's things. Look, it's just an old map." "Those symbols, they're the same as on that stone marker. What do they mean?" He shoved the map back into his pocket. "They're nothing. Old boundary markings." "Stop lying to me," I shouted, surprising both of us with my vehemence. "Tessa is missing. We're lost, and you're hiding something. What is it? What did you really bring us out here for?" Something changed in Ryan's face then, the charming facade crumbling away to reveal something cold and calculating beneath. "You wouldn't understand. This goes back generations in my family. Try me." He sighed, glancing around as if afraid we might be overheard. My grandfather wasn't just some hiker. He was a collector of certain kinds of knowledge, power that most people don't believe exists anymore. What kind of power? The kind that comes from old places, old spirits. Ryan's voice took on a fervent quality. The woman I told you about, Meredith Blackwood. She wasn't just some witch. She found a way to bind herself to this forest, to draw energy from it. My grandfather spent his life trying to understand how she did it. I took an involuntary step back. "And that's why we're here? You're looking for some witch from the 1800s? Not looking for her. I know exactly where she is." His eyes gleamed with an unnatural light. 3 days from now is the anniversary of her binding, the only time she can be approached safely, if you have the right offerings. A horrible suspicion began to form in my mind. Offerings? Ryan didn't answer, but he didn't need to. The implication hung in the air between us. "Where's Tessa?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't hurt her," he insisted. "I would never hurt her. But Meredith, she needs a vessel, someone young, vibrant." Tessa volunteered. "Bullshit. She would never, not consciously, no. But last night, when she drank from the spring, that water came from Meredith's spring. It opened her to suggestion." I remembered Tessa filling her water bottle the previous day, how Ryan had directed her to a specific still pool away from the flowing stream, how she'd seemed increasingly disoriented as the evening progressed. "You drugged her," I accused. "I prepared her," he corrected. "For a great honor. My family has served Meredith for generations, but no one has successfully completed the ritual. I'll be the first." "And what happens to Tessa when this ritual is complete?" Ryan's silence was answer enough. "You're insane," I said, backing away. "We need to find help, send search and rescue." "There's no way out," he said calmly. "Not until Meredith allows it. The forest is hers. The paths go where she wants them to go." As if to emphasize his point, I realized we had somehow circled back to the stone marker we'd found the previous day, despite having walked in what I thought was a straight line away from it. "You've killed us both," I whispered. "No," Ryan replied with unsettling serenity. "You're not the offering. You're the witness. Meredith always requires a witness." A twig snapped in the underbrush behind us. We both turned to see Tessa standing at the edge of the clearing, but it wasn't Tessa. Not really. Her posture was all wrong, too stiff and formal. Her head was tilted at an unnatural angle, and her eyes were completely black, like holes cut into her face. "Ryan," she said, but the voice wasn't hers. It was older, raspier, with an accent I couldn't place. "You've brought me what was promised." Ryan fell to his knees, head bowed. "Meredith, I am your faithful servant." The thing wearing Tessa's body approached, moving with a fluid grace that was nothing like my friend's energetic bounce. It, stopped in front of Ryan, placing a hand on his head almost tenderly. "You seek my power," the creature said. "Yes," Ryan whispered fervently. "I've studied the old ways, prepared the ritual site as instructed." "Show me." Ryan scrambled to his feet and led the way deeper into the forest, the thing that was not Tessa following close behind. I stood frozen, terrified but unwilling to be left alone. After a moment of paralyzed indecision, I followed at a distance. They moved quickly, Ryan practically running ahead while the creature wearing Tessa's skin glided after him. I struggled to keep pace while remaining unnoticed, my heart pounding so loudly I was certain they must hear it. The forest grew darker, older. The trees here were massive, their trunks wider than any I'd seen before, their canopy so dense that little sunlight penetrated. The ground was spongy underfoot, perpetually damp. The air smelled of rot and stagnant water. We reached another clearing, though clearing wasn't quite the right word. It was more like a natural amphitheater, ringed by 7 of those stone markers, each covered in the strange symbols. In the center was a spring, but unlike the crystal-clear waters Alexander Springs was known for, this pool was dark, almost black, with no visible bottom. Ryan rushed around the space, lighting candles that had been placed at the base of each stone marker. The flames burned with an unnatural bluish tint. "I've prepared everything," he told the thing wearing Tessa's body. "The offering, the sacred space, the witness." The creature's black eyes found mine where I hid partially behind a massive oak. "Come forward, witness." My body moved against my will, pulled by some invisible force until I stood at the edge of the circle of stones. "Please," I whispered, looking into the thing that wore my friend's face. "Tessa, if you're in there." The creature smiled with Tessa's mouth, a horrible stretching of lips that went too wide, revealed too many teeth. "Your friend is here, but sleeping. Soon she will be gone entirely, and I will walk the world again in young flesh." It turned to Ryan. "Begin the ritual." Ryan produced a knife from his pack. Not a survival knife, but an ornate dagger with symbols etched along its blade. He began to chant in a language I didn't recognize, the same strange syllables as the symbols on the stones. The creature wearing Tessa's body approached the black pool and began to disrobe, dropping Tessa's clothes piece by piece onto the damp ground. As the last garment fell away, I saw that Tessa's skin was changing, darkening in patches as if dissolving from within. I wanted to run, to scream, but my body remained frozen in place, held by whatever power controlled this clearing. Ryan's chanting grew louder, more frenzied. He approached the nude figure by the pool, dagger raised. In that moment, I realized his role in all this, not to save Tessa but to complete the sacrifice. To kill her body once the transformation was complete, releasing Meredith fully into our world. "No!" I screamed, but my voice seemed swallowed by the thick air. Ryan placed the tip of the dagger against Tessa's, Meredith's, sternum. The creature smiled, anticipating the final act that would complete its resurrection. But then, something unexpected happened. Tessa's body convulsed violently, doubling over as if in pain. A sound emerged from her throat, not the raspy voice of Meredith, but Tessa's own voice, screaming. "She fights," the creature hissed, straightening again. "Surprising strength in this one." "Tessa," I called. "Fight her! Don't let her in!" "Silence the witness," the creature commanded Ryan. He turned toward me, dagger now pointed in my direction. "I'm sorry, Emma. You shouldn't interfere with things you don't understand." As he advanced on me, Tessa's body convulsed again, more violently this time. She crashed to her knees, head thrown back in a silent scream. When her eyes reopened, they flickered between black and Tessa's natural brown. "Emma!" Tessa's voice gasped. "Run!" Ryan whirled back toward her. "No, the binding isn't complete." Tessa's body rose, moving jerkily as if two entities fought for control. "You lied to me," Tessa's voice accused Ryan. "You brought me here to die." "For a greater purpose," he insisted, "for power beyond imagining." "You never loved me," Tessa said, tears streaming down her face even as her skin continued to model and change. "I was just a sacrifice." "You were chosen," Ryan corrected, reaching for her. "Special." What happened next occurred so quickly I could barely process it. Tessa's body lunged forward with inhuman speed, fingers curling into claws. Those claws, no longer human fingers but something elongated and sharp, sank into Ryan's chest, piercing through cloth, skin, and bone as if they were paper. Ryan's scream cut off in a wet gurgle as Tessa, or the thing that was partly Tessa, partly Meredith, tore his ribcage open with a sickening crack. Blood sprayed across the stones, the pool, Tessa's naked form. I should have run then. Every instinct screamed at me to flee. But I remained rooted in place, watching in horror as my friend's body bent over Ryan's twitching form and began to feed. The sound of tearing flesh and cracking bone echoed in the clearing. Above it all, a woman's laughter, neither Tessa's nor the raspy voice of Meredith, but something new, something combined, rang out. When the creature finally looked up at me, its face was streaked with gore, chunks of meat caught between two sharp teeth. Its eyes flickered, black, then brown, then black again, as the two entities within battled for dominance. "Emma," it said, and I couldn't tell which of them spoke. "Run, before I finish." This time, my limbs obeyed. I turned and fled, crashing through the underbrush with no thought for direction or stealth. Behind me, the laughter continued, rising to a shriek that no human throat could produce. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out, collapsing in a heap of trembling muscles and terror sweat. The forest around me was silent now. No birds, no insects, as if all living things had fled. As my breathing slowed, I became aware of something clutched in my hand. Ryan's map, which I must have grabbed in my panic. I unfolded it with shaking fingers. The symbols seemed to writhe on the page, but now, impossibly, I could understand them. They were directions. Not geographic coordinates, but ritual instructions. A binding spell. I recognized phrases, concepts: bind the spirit, contain the hunger, seal the boundary. Night was falling, the forest growing darker by the minute. I had no idea which direction would lead to safety. No supplies, no weapon. But I had the map, and somehow I could read it. Using the last light of day, I studied the ritual described in those strange symbols. Not a summoning as Ryan had intended, but a binding, a way to lock Meredith back into her watery prison. It required blood freely given, symbols drawn at specific points. I had nothing to lose. If I tried to simply flee, the forest would probably keep me running in circles until the creature found me. My only hope was to attempt the binding ritual, to buy myself enough time to escape. Using a sharp stone, I cut my palm, letting blood well up. Following the map's instructions, I began to draw symbols on the trees around me, marking a protective circle. The blood seemed to glow faintly in the gathering darkness, the symbols burning themselves deeper into the bark than should have been possible. From somewhere in the distance came a howl. Rage and hunger combined in one inhuman sound. She had finished with Ryan and was coming for me. I worked faster, completing the circle of symbols. According to the map, I needed to speak certain words while standing in the center of the circle. Words that would temporarily bind Meredith, preventing her from crossing the boundary I'd created with my blood. The howl came again, closer this time. I could hear branches breaking, underbrush being trampled by something moving fast through the forest. Standing in the center of my blood-marked circle, I began to recite the words shown on the map. They felt strange in my mouth, syllables that no human tongue was meant to form. But I pressed on, voice gaining strength as the words themselves seemed to vibrate in the air around me. A crashing sound from the tree line. And then she was there. The creature that had once been Tessa stood at the edge of my circle, naked body smeared with dried blood and gore. Her skin had continued to change, now mottled with patches of what looked like bark or fungus. Her fingers had elongated into those terrible claws, and her teeth, no longer human teeth but needle-sharp fangs, gleamed in the last rays of sunset. "Witness," she whispers, "I'm waiting for you." I haven't returned to Ocala National Forest. I never will. But sometimes when I pass a small pond or creek, I catch a glimpse of something in the water, a face that is both Tessa's and not, watching me with hungry eyes. Or I'll notice a strange mark carved into a tree, one of those symbols from the binding ritual that my mind somehow understands. The authorities eventually closed the case. 2 hikers lost in the wilderness, presumed dead, a traumatized survivor with a head injury, and an unreliable account. Life moved on for everyone except me. I've tried to research Meredith Blackwood to find any historical record of her existence. There's virtually nothing, just a few obscure references in old county records to a hermit woman who lived near Alexander Springs in the 1870s. and a brief mention in a church register of a suspected practitioner of dark arts who disappeared after local children went missing. But in my dreams, I know her entire history. I see glimpses of her life, a young woman ostracized for her knowledge of herbs and healing, retreating deeper into the forest as settlements encroached on her solitude. I see her discovery of the Black Pool, her first taste of its waters, the gradual transformation as something ancient and hungry entered her body. And I see her death, not at the hands of a mob as Ryan had claimed, but a deliberate sacrifice. She had bound herself to the forest willingly, merging with something far older than human civilization that slumbered beneath the springs, not for power, as Ryan believed, but for vengeance against a world that had rejected her. 3 months after my escape, I received a small package in the mail. No return address, no note inside, just a smooth black stone that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Written on it in what looked like dried blood was a single symbol from the binding ritual, the one that translates roughly to witness. I threw it away immediately, but the next morning, it was sitting on my bedside table. I've moved 4 times since then. The stone always finds me. Sometimes I wonder if Tessa's truly gone, or if some part of her consciousness remains trapped inside the creature she became. In my darkest moments, I imagine her aware but unable to control her actions, a prisoner in her own transforming body. This thought haunts me more than any other. I've started to notice the symbols appearing in my everyday life, in the arrangement of cracks on a sidewalk, in the pattern of veins on a fallen leaf, in the condensation on my bathroom mirror after a shower. Coincidences, my therapist insists, pattern recognition gone haywire from trauma. But I know better. The binding I performed that night wasn't just to contain Meredith. It created a connection between us. The ritual marks both the bound and the binder. I didn't just witness her, I became part of her story, another link in a chain stretching back centuries. Last week, I found myself unconsciously drawing the symbols while on a conference call for work. My hand moved of its own accord, creating a perfect rendition of the binding circle on my notepad. When I realized what I was doing, I burned the paper immediately, but the symbols remained etched in my mind, clearer than ever. The whispers are getting louder, more insistent, sometimes forming words I can almost understand. Names, instructions, promises. I've started to dream of the Black Pool, not with fear, but with longing. In these dreams, I wade into its depths willingly, feeling the cool water rise around me, watching my skin begin to change. I wake from these dreams refreshed, energized, my mind clearer than it's been since that night in the forest. My therapist says this is progress, the subconscious mind processing trauma, transforming fear into power. But she doesn't see how my reflection has begun to change, subtle shifts in my features that no one else seems to notice. The way water responds to my presence now, pipes that mysteriously fix themselves in my apartment, plants that flourish with minimal care, small cuts that heal too quickly. Yesterday, I found myself standing in front of a map of Florida, my fingers tracing a route back to Ocala National Forest. Not to flee, not to fight, but to return, to complete something left unfinished. I booked the time off work today, packed a small bag with only essentials. The black stone sits in my pocket, warm against my thigh, pulsing like a heart. I know what will happen when I reach the Black Pool again. I understand now that Ryan wasn't entirely wrong. There is power in those waters, in that binding, but he misunderstood its nature. It isn't about domination or control. It's about transformation, union, completion. As I write these final words, my witness testimony, I can feel her waiting for me. Not just Meredith anymore, not just the ancient thing she merged with. Tessa is there too now, a part of the whole, and soon I will join them. The forest calls its witnesses home eventually. The binding works both ways. If you're reading this, stay away from the unmarked trails of Ocala. Don't follow whispers in the pines. And if you find a black stone with strange markings, for God's sake, don't touch it. Because once you become a witness, you're already part of the story. And Meredith's story never ends, she hissed, circling my protective boundary. You cannot escape me. This forest is mine. I continued the chant, the words burning my throat as I spoke them. The creature snarled, testing the edge of my circle with one clawed hand but drawing back as if burned. "Clever girl," it said, Tessa's voice and Meredith's blending in a horrific chorus. "But this binding is temporary. When your blood dries, I will have you." I knew she was right. The ritual I'd performed wasn't the full binding that had originally trapped Meredith in the spring. It was just a temporary measure, a holding spell. But I didn't need forever. I just needed enough time to find my way out of the forest. For hours, the creature prowled around my circle, testing its boundaries, trying to frighten me into breaking the chant. I maintained the words, my voice growing hoarse but never stopping. Sometime in the deepest part of night, I became aware of a change. The creature had stopped its pacing and stood perfectly still, head cocked as if listening. "The sun approaches," it said finally, "and with it, my strength wanes. You've won this night, witness, but I am patient. I will find you again." With one last, hate-filled glare, the creature turned and melted into the darkness of the forest. I maintained my position until the first rays of dawn broke through the trees, unsure if this was just another trick. When full daylight arrived with no sign of the creature's return, I finally allowed myself to stop chanting. My throat was raw, my hand throbbing where I'd cut it, my body trembling with exhaustion and fear. But I was alive. Using the position of the rising sun for orientation, I began walking east, hoping to eventually hit a road or trail. The forest seemed different in daylight, just trees and undergrowth with no sense of the malevolent presence that had permeated it the night before. After several hours of walking, I heard the most beautiful sound imaginable, car engines on a distant highway. Following the noise, I eventually emerged onto State Road 19, where a horrified family on a weekend drive picked up the wild-looking woman with blood-matted hair and a 1,000-yard stare. The authorities searched for Tessa and Ryan, of course. I told them we'd gotten separated, that there had been an accident. I couldn't tell them the truth. Who would believe me? They found our campsite eventually, but no sign of my companions. The forest had swallowed them. Sometimes, when I wake gasping from nightmares of black pools and blood-painted symbols, I wonder if I truly escaped. The doctors say I experienced a psychotic break brought on by dehydration and trauma, that the binding ritual I performed was a delusion, a way for my mind to process the trauma of watching my friends die in some mundane but horrible accident my brain has suppressed. But the whispering hasn't stopped. On quiet nights I can hear her, not just in my dreams but in the rustle of leaves outside my window.